Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. Israel's ambassador to the UN, Danny Danon, will deliver a statement about last night's incident involving humanitarian workers from the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. He will also discuss this afternoon's General Assembly session and resolution vote. He'll take your questions afterwards. Please remember to state your name and news outlet. Thanks.
Good afternoon. Last night, Hamas murdered at least 5 Palestinian aid workers in Gaza. The ambushed bus clearly marked and carrying over 24 humanitarian staff from the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. Several others were injured. Some may have been taken hostage. These were civilians. These are aid workers risking their lives to feed the people of Gaza. Hamas guns them down in cold blood because they do not care about Palestinian lives. They do not care about life, period. It is an attack on humanitarian workers, who the UN claims to care so deeply about. And I'm asking you today, where is the condemnation from the Secretary General? Where is the condemnation from the United Nations? Moreover, the General Assembly will not meet to condemn that crime. It will not gather to denounce Hamas. Instead, it will probably pass a resolution which is a farce. It is a moral failure. It is a political stunt. If it passes, it will be remembered not as a step toward peace, but as a disgraceful act of appeasement. It is a resolution that rewards terrorists and abandons their victims. Very soon, in about an hour, the GA will vote on a text that is a text that does not condemn Hamas for the atrocities it committed on October 7. I encourage you to read the text and look for the condemnation. It does not make the release of the 53 hostages still held in Gaza a condition for a ceasefire. It does not hold Hamas accountable. The terrorist who started this war, prolonged this war, and tortures our hostages. This assembly has had over 20 months to say the words. Very simple. We condemn Hamas and we demand the immediate release of the hostages. But those words are nowhere to be found. Instead, the GA will try to place all the pressure on us, on Israel, the only party that accepted the proposal that was offered by the US, Qatar, and Egypt. Israel has accepted every proposal under the framework. Hamas has rejected them all. And yet, this resolution acts as if that never happened. I say today to every delegation that will vote on this resolution, and we know that it will pass. If you refuse to condemn Hamas, you commend them. If you fail to demand the release of the hostages, you abandon them. If you try to erase October 7, you are complicit in allowing it to happen again. No General Assembly resolution, no moral failure, no hypocrisy will change the reality. Israel will do whatever it takes to bring all of them back home. Thank you.
M. Husseini from Flashpoints.
Well, I saw Ambassador Witkoff last night, and we accepted the proposal he put on the table. It wasn't easy for us because it required releasing hundreds of terrorist murderers, but we said yes. Hamas said no. There are still negotiations ongoing, and we will be there. Once Hamas will say that they are willing to move forward, we will be there. We want to see more hostages coming back home.
Why did you internet access? Is it to cover up your war crimes?
1 minute. I will answer your question. Don't worry, please.
Ambassador, is Israel planning to strike Iran? And I have a second question.
Well, that's it? That's the only question?
No, I think so.
Well, I will tell you that. You know, I cannot go into details, but we are very serious when we say that we will not allow Iran to obtain nuclear capabilities. President Trump and the administration are trying to negotiate with the Iranians. They said it will be for 2 months. I think that window is almost closing very soon. And if we will see that diplomacy is not working, we will do whatever is necessary to make sure they don't obtain the nuclear capabilities. We saw a few months ago they sent hundreds of ballistic missiles into Israel. So we cannot wait for them to have nuclear capability. We will not be in that position.
How many nuclear weapons does Israel have?
Is there anything imminent?
I will not get into that. Yeah. Yes.
Shudaji with Transcendental Television. Ambassador, I think this is a question many of us would like to know. We know the center of this issue now is what you mentioned, Hamas. But can you clarify a little bit, what is Hamas now? Like, who can you define as Hamas? The one who's with guns, who attack Israeli civilians? Can you give us a little bit of elaboration?
So Hamas today, it's not the same Hamas that was there in Gaza on October 7th. It's reduced, it's weak, but it's still there. We saw what they did last night to the humanitarian workers. They are still trying to take advantage of the humanitarian aid. We revealed some information that they're actually putting pressure on the NGOs inside Gaza. So they are still there. Very weak, but are still there. Well, if you see somebody carrying a gun and shooting civilians or aid workers, he's a terrorist. And that's what we are doing. We are hunting them down. Yes, I will answer your question, please.
Did you cut off the internet to stop more evidence of your war crimes from coming out, or are you escalating your murderous carnage in Gaza?
Okay, I will answer your question. We haven't cut the internet in Gaza. There is the internet in Gaza, if that's your question.
Didn't Netanyahu foreshadow that this would happen on May 14th? Dropsite News is reporting that he indicated that Israel wanted to cut off the internet in Gaza.
No, so I can tell you that today there is internet in Gaza.
So everybody's lying about
And
this
by the
too,
way,
except
you can see the videos that are being sent out of Gaza every day, including the video of what's happening to Gazans who are standing in line to receive aid from the new foundation, which is sponsored by the US, and they are being threatened by Hamas. And in some cases, there are videos of Hamas shooting civilians because they are standing in line. So to your question, yes, there is internet in Gaza today. Please.
Sorry, no, me. Yeah. Ambassador Adla Massoud from The National. Will Israel be participating next week at the UN conference that's co-sponsored by France and Saudi Arabia?
Absolutely not. We will not take part in this conference. It's a circus, and I was very happy to see that the United States decided also not to participate in this circus. And when Mr. Macron will arrive to the UN, I will ask him if he has solved all the problems in France, in Europe, that he thinks that coming here to the UN and pushing this conference will actually be constructive. It's not constructive. Actually, it's hurting the negotiations because it allows Hamas to think that maybe something will come from the UN. We hope that Hamas will understand that they should accept the deal that was offered by the US, Qatar, and Egypt. That is the only way forward. Yes, please.
Thank you. Yasser Abu Shabab, who is leading a militia recruited and financed and organized by Israel, who is attacking the people longing for food. And now you call them the humanitarian worker. These are agents. And the family of Abu Shabab clearly issued a statement disowning Yasser Abu Shabab. And you tell here people, so to believe you, these are humanitarian workers. These are agents for Israel. You know that.
Well, I don't know the details that you mentioned, but I can tell you one thing. There are forces in Gaza that don't want that the centers that were opened will succeed. As of now, there are 4 centers. 3 of them are operational. Today, 3 centers were opened. And today, 36,000 meals were distributed by the fund to packages to people and families in Gaza. So I don't know who is supporting or not supporting, but there are people who are trying to block civilians from getting the aid that is being distributed by the fund. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's time to start. I declare the 10th emergency special session of the General Assembly resumed. Members will recall that in paragraph 11 of its resolution ES 10/26 of 11 December 2024, the Assembly decided, and I quote, to adjourn the 10th emergency special session temporarily and to authorize the President of the General Assembly at its most recent session to resume its meeting upon request from member states. In this regard, I should like to draw the attention of delegations to document A/ES 10/1036, which contains a letter dated 5th June 2025 from the permanent representatives of Yemen and Cameroon in their respective capacities as chair of the Arab Group and chair of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation Group, requesting the resumption of the 10th emergency special session. I intend to conduct the proceedings of this meeting in accordance with the rules of procedure of the Assembly and the past practices of this emergency special sessions. In keeping with established practice, I should now like to invite the attention of the Assembly to document A/ES 10/1037 concerning member states that are in arrears in the payment of their financial contributions to the United Nations within the terms of Article 19 of the Charter. May I take it that the Assembly duly takes note of the information contained in this document? It is so decided. The Assembly will now resume its consideration of Agenda Item 5 entitled Illegal Israeli Actions in Occupied East Jerusalem and the rest of the occupied Palestinian Territory. In this connection, the Assembly has before it a draft resolution contained in document A/ES 10/L34/revision 1. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we convene today following the use of the veto by a permanent member of the Security Council against a draft resolution that contained 3 urgent demands. 1, an immediate, unconditional, and permanent ceasefire in Gaza respected by all parties. 2, the immediate, dignified, and unconditional release of all hostages held by Hamas and other groups. And 3, the immediate and unconditional lifting of all restrictions on the entry of humanitarian aid into Gaza and its safe and unhindered distribution at scale, including by the United Nations and humanitarian partners throughout the Gaza Strip. After 20 months of war, the horrors in Gaza must end. Despite the urgency, the Security Council remains once again paralyzed on this issue, unable to fulfill its responsibility for maintaining international peace and security. And once again, the General Assembly is called upon to take the lead in addressing the unacceptable and catastrophic situation in Gaza. It is unacceptable that the killing of innocent civilians, including women and children, persists with no end in sight. It is unacceptable that hostages continue to be held. It is unacceptable that civilians are willfully deprived of food, water, and medicine, and that they continue to be forcibly displaced. Today, the General Assembly is called upon to act. As representatives of the international community, we must translate our commitment to the Charter of the United Nations, to international law, to justice, and to the dignity and worth of every human being into meaningful action on the ground. These values are not simply ideals. They are the very foundation of hope and peace. Together, we must work to finally end the horrors in Gaza. We must start building a better future where the peoples of Palestine and Israel can live in peace, security, and dignity in their sovereign and independent states. Next week, member states will have an opportunity to showcase their resolve in realizing that promise at the high-level International Conference for the Peaceful Settlement of the Question of Palestine and the implementation of the two-state solution. Let us not forget that the two-state solution is based on Resolution 181, adopted by the General Assembly in 1947, 78 years ago, and reaffirmed by many other resolutions. I call upon all delegations in this hall today to do the utmost to lay the groundwork for the two-state solution. It is the prize for durable peace and security between Israel and Palestine. The time to act is now. I thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Spain to introduce draft Resolution A/ES10/L34, Revision 1.
Señor Presidente, tengo el honor de presentar el proyecto de resolución A/ES10/L34/Rep1, titulado Protección de civiles y defensa de las obligaciones jurídicas y humanitarias. En primer lugar, me gustaría agradecer a todos los copatrocinadores su apoyo a esta importante iniciativa que el presidente del Gobierno de España, el señor Pedro Sánchez, anunció en el Congreso de los Diputados el pasado día 7 de mayo, con objeto de que la Asamblea General de Naciones Unidas se pronuncie en respuesta a la catastrófica situación humanitaria en Gaza. España, junto con Palestina, ha estado trabajando en este proyecto de resolución que exige a las partes del conflicto que cumplan con sus obligaciones de derecho internacional, también incluido el derecho internacional humanitario, y exige asimismo que se facilite de forma inmediata y permanente la entrada plena, rápida, segura y sin obstáculos de ayuda humanitaria a gran escala en Gaza, incluyendo alimentos y suministros médicos, combustible, equipamiento, refugio y acceso a agua limpia. En este contexto, el proyecto de resolución acoge con satisfacción y apoya el plan coordinado por las Naciones Unidas para reanudar las entregas de ayuda humanitaria en Gaza. El texto también subraya la obligación de las partes en un conflicto armado de respetar y proteger a la población civil y de velar constantemente por preservar los bienes de carácter civil. En particular, exhorta a todos los Estados a que respeten y protejan al personal humanitario, al personal de las Naciones Unidas y asociado, al personal médico, así como al personal humanitario dedicado exclusivamente a tareas médicas, sus medios de transporte y equipamiento, así como hospitales y otras instalaciones médicas. El proyecto de resolución reitera el compromiso con la solución de los dos Estados, con la Franja de Gaza como parte del Estado de Palestina. Rechaza firmemente cualquier intento de realizar cambios demográficos en la Franja de Gaza y Cisjordania y condena todos los planes de traslado forzosos individuales o masivos, así como las deportaciones de personas protegidas del territorio ocupado. El texto exige además el cese inmediato de la construcción de asentamientos, expansión, confiscación de tierra, demolición de viviendas, desalojos forzosos y violencia de los colonos en Cisjordania, incluido Jerusalén Oriental, y pide medidas inmediatas y concretas para preservar la integridad territorial del territorio palestino ocupado, incluido Jerusalén Oriental, y para unificar la Franja de Gaza con Cisjordania bajo autoridad palestina. Señor presidente, es urgente que la comunidad internacional lance un mensaje rotundo sobre la situación en Gaza y animamos encarecidamente a todos los Estados miembros a que voten a favor de este proyecto de resolución. Por último, señor presidente, solicito que se suspenda el debate a las 4 de la tarde a fin de proceder a adoptar una decisión sobre el proyecto de resolución A/ES10/L34/REP1, en el entendimiento de que el debate se reanudaría inmediatamente después de la adopción de la decisión y que el 10º periodo de sesiones de emergencia solo se aplazaría temporalmente después de la conclusión del debate. Muchas gracias.
I thank the distinguished representative of Spain. The representative of Spain has moved that the debate on agenda item 5 be suspended at 4 p.m. for the Assembly to proceed to the consideration of draft resolution A/ES10/L34/revision 1, and that the debate would continue after the action on the draft resolution. It is my understanding that without setting a precedent and given the urgency of the issue, if the Assembly were to decide to suspend the debate at 4 p.m. for the Assembly to proceed to the consideration of draft resolution A/ES10/L34/revision 1, and to continue the debate after the action on the draft resolution, and if the Assembly were to adopt the draft resolution subsequently, the 10th emergency special session would be adjourned temporarily following the conclusion of the debate on item 5. Is there any objection to the motion? I hear no objection. It is so decided. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Observer State of Palestine.
Mr. President, I thank you for your swift response to the request made by the chairs of the Arab Group and the OIC for the resumption of the 10th Emergency Special Session of the General Assembly. This request was made following the veto cast by the United States on the 4th of June on the draft resolution submitted to the Security Council by the elected 10 members of the Council. the E10, and supported by 14 Council members, demanding an immediate ceasefire, the lifting of Israel's blockade on humanitarian access, and the restoration of all essential services to the Palestinian civilian population in accordance with international humanitarian law, and the release of all hostages as the Council demanded previously in resolution that regrettably remain unimplemented with grave consequences. Mr. President, the distinguished delegations, we meet here on the 614th day of a full-fledged assault against the Palestinian people. And as we continue all efforts to mobilize the international community to take the requisite actions to put an end to this genocide, we thank Spain and the members of the core group for their sense of urgency and responsibility in putting forward this draft resolution that once again clearly spells out the international community's stance in favor of a permanent ceasefire, release of hostages and prisoners, unhindered humanitarian aid at scale throughout the Gaza Strip, and the full withdrawal of Israeli forces. This draft resolution stresses Israel's obligation as occupying power to ensure that humanitarian aid reaches all the population in need, and demands the immediate and permanent facilitation of full, rapid, safe, and unhindered entry of humanitarian assistance at scale, including food and medical supplies, to and throughout the Gaza Strip, and its delivery to all Palestinian civilians, as well as fuel, equipment, shelter, and access to clean water in accordance with international humanitarian law, with full respect for the humanitarian principles of humanity, neutrality, impartiality, and independence, in coordination with the United Nations. The text strongly condemns any use of starvation of civilians as a method of warfare and the unlawful denial of humanitarian access, and stresses the obligation not to deprive civilians in the Gaza Strip of objects indispensable to their survival, including by willfully impeding relief supplies and access. And while this language is the strongest to date on these matters, Israel's continuing disregard and blatant contempt for the rules of international law, the resolutions of UN bodies, and the positions of states around the world must lead to the translation of this language into resolute action, and it has to be done now. No arms, no money, no trade to oppress Palestinians, ethnically cleanse them and steal their land. Use the tools available to you, each and every one of you in your national capacity, and as an institution, General Assembly and other parts of the UN. These tools, the political, diplomatic, legal, economic tools, to hold accountable those responsible for these crimes and atrocities against an entire people, the Palestinian people. Wait no longer. We cannot every day count every day in hundreds of Palestinian lives lost. This illegal, immoral situation cannot continue. It has to stop, and stop immediately. We thank all those who are mobilized to end this horrific tragedy, governments and peoples from across the globe who are standing up for humanity and the defense of the entire nation of Palestine. Israel must end its war and its siege against the Palestinian people, where over 2 million people have been subjected to relentless bombardments, wanton destruction, and engineered starvation, deprived of food, water, electricity, and shelter, stripped of any sense of human security and human dignity. Israel must abide by international law. It cannot remain the exception to every rule. There must be an end to its impunity. We welcome that the draft resolution clearly stresses the need for accountability in order to ensure Israel's respect of international law obligations, and in this regard calls upon all member states to individually and collectively take all measures necessary in line with international law and the Charter of the United Nations to ensure compliance by Israel with its obligations. It is the states assembled here, all of you, who through their actions, by translating their legitimate outrage into rightful deeds, can end this horrific reality. Mr. President, let me conclude by saying the following. We want to see life prevail. We want to see freedom prevail. We want to see international law prevail. We want to see peace prevail. We reject all attacks against civilians, whether Palestinians or Israelis. We want to see an independent and sovereign state of Palestine with East Jerusalem as its capital, living side by side with Israel in peace and security. We want to end this illegal occupation and this prolonged conflict for once for all, in accordance with international law and the relevant UN resolutions. Enough bloodshed and enough suffering. It is not with more massacres and more occupation and more displacement and more annexation that this conflict will end. It is by breaking the cycle of violence through the fulfillment of our fundamental rights and the achievement of shared peace and security that we will bring this conflict to a close and bring healing and justice for all its victims. The actions you take today to stop the killing, displacement, and famine will determine how many more Palestinian children die a horrific death. The actions you take today will determine if Palestinian children ever get a chance at life. We count not only on your vote, but also on your deeds to make sure our actions matches our words. We have the actual power to deter the continued commission of atrocities and to uphold the tenets of international law and the noble cause of humanity. There is no time to waste. Act now. Save Gaza. Save Palestine. Save peace. And we salute all of you, governments and millions in the streets and trade unions who are taking actions to stop this atrocity and this genocide. And I hope that all of you would vote in favor of the resolution before us And I thank you very much, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Observer State of Palestine. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Israel.
Mr. President, Excellencies, Eitan Horn is a father, he is a husband, a social worker. He is an Israeli who moved from Argentina with his family when he was a child. In October 7, 2023, he decided to visit his brother Yair for the weekend of the holy festival of Simchat Torah. Yair lived in Kibbutz Nir Oz, right by Gaza. On that Saturday morning, Hamas turned a holiday into a day of bloodshed and evil. Eitan and his brother Yair huddled inside the safe room of Yair's home. They texted their family. They tried to stay quiet. Then contact was lost. Hamas released a propaganda video showing the two men starved, beaten, and terrified. They had been tortured and starved in Gaza. Yair was released in the hostage agreement in February, but Eitan remains in captivity. For months, there has been no proof of life, no sign of mercy, only agony. Eitan is not alone. He is one of 53 Israeli hostages still held by Hamas. Each one of them is an entire world. However, this General Assembly has failed to treat them as such. You gather here today not to demand their release, not to call out the terrorist regime. No, today is a vote on a resolution that does not condition a ceasefire on the hostages' freedom, a resolution that refuses to condemn their captors, a resolution that rewards the terrorists responsible for their suffering. This resolution does not advance peace. It does not reflect the truths on the ground. It does not reflect the values this institution claims to uphold. Instead of applying pressure on Hamas, the group that started this war and continues to prolong it, this resolution tries to place all the pressure on us, on Israel, the only party actively working to bring its people home. Colleagues, there is a real credible framework already on the table. It was constructed with the support of the US, Egypt, and Qatar. Israel has accepted multiple proposals under it, each time making painful and hard compromises. Hamas has rejected every single one, every proposal, every opportunity. They responded with not negotiating and keeping silent, because Hamas is not interested in peace. It is interested in survival, delay, and the prolonging of terror. But this resolution in front of you says nothing about that. It does not acknowledge the facts. It does not hold Hamas accountable. Instead, it hands Hamas everything it wants: time, leverage, legitimacy. By adopting this resolution today, you will give Hamas political cover. You will strengthen their hand. And you will tell the families of the hostages that their loved ones are no longer your priority. It must be acknowledged that by failing to condition a ceasefire on the release of the hostages, you told every terrorist organization that abducting civilians works, that holding elderly men and young women in tunnels earns you a seat at the table, that you can brutalize the innocent and still be rewarded with resolutions from the world's highest body. This is not diplomacy. It is surrender. You know what Hamas is. You have heard the stories. You have seen the footage. You know they do not care about international law or your resolutions. They care about one thing: power. This assembly is giving it to them. The hostages have not seen sunlight. They have not spoken to their families. Many have been tortured. Many have been murdered. All of them are being denied the most basic forms of human dignity. Somehow, this institution cannot find the strength to condemn Hamas. Instead, you lecture Israel. You accuse us of collective punishment. You pretend that the suffering in Gaza is disconnected from Hamas's constant atrocities. But let me show you the facts. Meanwhile, Israel continues to deliver humanitarian aid, despite the slander contained in this resolution. Over the past weeks, over 16 million meals have been delivered through the new international mechanism in Gaza, Humanitarian Foundation. It was developed in coordination with the US. On Tuesday, June 10 alone, over 2 million meals were distributed across 3 distribution sites. Only today, 36,000 meals were distributed. This mechanism does what the previous one could not. It stops Hamas from stealing the aid. At the same time, hundreds of aid trucks have entered Gaza in recent weeks, but over 500 trucks are still sitting undelivered inside Gaza because of the UN's failure to distribute on the other side. And yet, this resolution claims Israel, and I quote, is using starvation of civilians as a weapon of war. That is a blood libel. This assembly speaks of balance, but this resolution is not balanced. It draws a false and disgusting equivalence between Israeli hostages and Palestinian terrorists. It compares innocent people held in unimaginable conditions to murderers protected by Israeli legal system with access to food and medical care. How can you do that? To compare these two groups is not just dishonest, it is morally indefensible. It erases the line between victim and aggressor. It deprives the hostages of their humanity. Because Israel values life, we agree to these exchanges, but we will never accept the moral inversion that this resolution represents. This resolution betrays the very people it claims to protect. It undermines real diplomacy. It emboldens those who seek only to destroy. So, esteemed colleagues, allow me to clarify something. If this assembly wishes to maintain even a shred of credibility, if it wishes to be seen as legitimate, if it claims to act with any integrity whatsoever, if it seeks to demonstrate the slightest bit of moral clarity, then any resolution on the situation in Gaza must begin with the following words. The General Assembly of the United Nations is appalled by the atrocities committed in the October 7 massacre. Not difficult to say. The General Assembly unequivocally condemns Hamas for those atrocities, as well as its use of human shields and looting of humanitarian aid. The General Assembly demands the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages. Now ask yourselves, why does this sentence not appear in this resolution you are about to vote on? What was so difficult? I asked my colleague from Spain, you negotiated this resolution. Where is the condemnation of Hamas? Why it was so hard? One line, 5 pages you have here. You all read it. One line, condemnation of Hamas. This assembly is not capable of doing it. Let's be honest. I challenge any one of you here in this chamber to stand up and explain why you could not bring yourselves to include a simple condemnation of Hamas. Explain it to your citizens, why you must vote for a resolution that looks away from a mass murder, rape, torture, and kidnapping. Explain it to your people, why you are trying to erase October 7 from history. It is shameful. Each member state that supports this resolution without a single word of condemnation for Hamas owes its people an answer. Because when you refuse to condemn Hamas, you commend them. You have abandoned the hostages, but we will not. We will fight to bring back each and every one of them, all of them. Those kidnapped from Nir Oz, Tamir Adar, Amiram Cooper, Ariel Konyo, David Konyo, Ronen Engel, Etan Horn, Eliyahu Margalit, Aryeh Zalmanovich, Matan Zanguker. Those kidnapped from the Nova Festival, Uriel Baruch, Elkana Buchbut, Ron Bar-Ratzlevsky, Eviatar David, Guy Gilboa Dalal, Inbar Hayman, Maxim Herkin, Guy Iluz, Segev Khalfon, Bar Cooperstein, Etan Avraham Mor, Yosef Chaim Ochana, Alon Oel, Avinatan Or, Yonatan Samerano, Idan Shtivi. Those kidnapped from Be'eri, Shachar Baruch, Meni Godard, Ofra Kedar, Dror Or, Yossi Sharabi, Ilan Weiss. Those kidnapped from Kfar Aza, Gali Berman and Ziv Berman. Those kidnapped from the Gaza envelope, Muhammad Al-Atrash, Nimrod Cohen, Shai Levinson, Omer Netura, Daniel Peretz. Those kidnapped from Nachal Oz, Matan Engrest, Itai Chen, Omri Miran. Those kidnapped from Nir Yitzhak, Tal Chaimi, Lior Rudef, and all those kidnapped into Gaza, Adar Goldin, Rand Gvili, Bipin Jushi from Nepal, Etan Levi, Tamir Nimrodi, Daniel Oz, and Joshua Lutu Molal from Tanzania. No resolution, no moral failure, no hypocrisy will change the reality. Israel will do whatever it takes to bring our people home. Maybe today some in this hall have lost their moral clarity, but we have not. That moral clarity guides us to say to the hostage families, אנחנו נחזיר אותם הביתה, את כולם. We will bring them back, all of them.
I thank the distinguished representative of Israel. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Kuwait, who will speak on behalf of the Gulf Cooperation Council.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. سيد الرئيس، أصحاب السعادة، السيدات والسادة، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. أتشرف بأن ألقي هذا البيان بالنيابة عن دول مجلس التعاون لدول الخليج العربية، وهم دولة الإمارات العربية المتحدة، ومملكة البحرين، والمملكة العربية السعودية، وسلطنة عمان، ودولة قطر، وبلادي دولة الكويت. كما أود أن أعرب عن تضامننا مع البيان الذي سيلقيه سعادة المندوب الدائم لليمن نيابة عن المجموعة العربية. سيد الرئيس، لقرابة العامين الماضيين شهد العالم بأسره سياسة الفوضى التي تنتهجها قوات الاحتلال الإسرائيلي من خلال انتهاك سيادة الدول وارتكابها إبادة جماعية واستخدام التجويع كأداة حرب وتعريض أمن المنطقة للخطر وتجاوز مبادئ القانون الدولي والأعراف الدولية. ولا بد أن يقف المجتمع الدولي وقفة حق طال انتظارها لكي يتحمل مسؤوليته نحو وقف هذه الممارسات التي تهدد مستقبل المنطقة وشعوبها، مع التأكيد على ضرورة اتخاذ خطوات جادة للحفاظ على الأمن والاستقرار الإقليميين وفقاً للقانون الدولي. إن مجلس التعاون الخليجي يدين وبأشد العبارات العدوان الإسرائيلي على قطاع غزة واستهداف المدنيين الفلسطينيين وتهجيرهم قسرياً، كما يدين الحصار الذي فرضته القوة القائمة بالاحتلال منذ شهر مارس الماضي، منع خلاله إدخال الغذاء والمياه والدواء والوقود، مما أدى إلى الانعدام التام للحياة في القطاع. ويؤكد مجلس التعاون وقوفه المبدئي والثابت إلى جانب الشعب الفلسطيني الشقيق في قطاع غزة ومحيطها، ويطالب بإنهاء الحصار المفروض على القطاع ورفع المعاناة عن الشعب الفلسطيني وضمان تأمين وصول كافة المساعدات الإنسانية والإغاثية والاحتياجات الأساسية لسكان غزة. لقد شهد العالم على الهواء مباشرة مشاهد لا يمكن وصفها أو حتى تخيلها، وذلك من خلال توافد الآلاف من المدنيين الأبرياء إلى نقاط توزيع المساعدات التي تديرها إسرائيل، والتي لا تتماشى مع معايير الأمم المتحدة للاستجابة الإنسانية، حيث أنه وفي ظل اصطفاف الناس بشكل يمتهن أبسط مبادئ الكرامة الإنسانية، سارعت آلة الحرب الإسرائيلية إلى قتل العزل وبشكل متعمد. وفي هذا السياق تؤكد دول مجلس التعاون على دعمها الكامل لآلية توزيع المساعدات الإنسانية التابعة للأمم المتحدة، وتؤكد أيضاً على ضرورة تحمل إسرائيل المسؤولية الكاملة عن انتهاكاتها واعتداءاتها المستمرة التي طالت المدنيين الأبرياء وأسفرت عن قتل أكثر من 55,000 منهم، معظمهم من النساء والأطفال، واعتبارها جرائم حرب وجرائم ضد الإنسانية وفق القانون الدولي الإنساني. ويرحب المجلس بقرار محكمة الجنايات الدولية الصادر بهذا الشأن بتاريخ 21 نوفمبر 2024. السيد الرئيس، إن ما نشهده اليوم من تصرفات وممارسات غير مسبوقة من قبل كيان مارق يستوجب تكاتف المجتمع الدولي لوضع حد لهذه الأعمال التي تستمر وتزداد سوءاً بسبب غياب المحاسبة. سيد الرئيس، إن المحاسبة أهم عناصر العدالة، وما شهدناه نهاية العام الماضي في الكنيست الإسرائيلي بشأن التشريعات التي تم اعتمادها لحظر عمل وكالة الأونروا في الأرض المحتلة ما هو إلا نتيجة مباشرة لغياب محاسبة هذا الكيان الذي تعدى بوحشيته وعدم إنسانيته على كافة الأعراف. وبناء على ذلك نؤكد على أن وكالة الأونروا كانت وما زالت وستستمر كأحد الإنجازات في تاريخ الأمم المتحدة، فهي العمود الفقري وحجر الزاوية للعمل الإنساني في الأرض الفلسطينية المحتلة، فهي وكالة لا غنى عنها. ولذلك يجب علينا جميعاً أن نؤكد وبصوت واحد على أهمية دور الأونروا كركيزة للاستقرار الإقليمي، وشريان حياة يحمل في طياته الأمل والفرصة لملايين من اللاجئين الفلسطينيين الذين تخدمهم الوكالة بمن فيهم الأطفال والنساء، وأن أي انقطاع أو تعليق لعمل الوكالة الحيوي سينجم عنه مخاطر إنسانية وسياسية وأمنية جسيمة، ولا بد من توفير الحماية اللازمة للعاملين الإنسانيين ورفض أي محاولات للمساس بولاية وكالة الأونروا أو تغيير مهامها أو استهداف العاملين فيها. ونطالب المجتمع الدولي باستمرار دعم عمل الوكالة على الصعيد السياسي والمالي والإنساني لإنفاذ ولاية الأونروا حتى عودة آخر لاجئ فلسطيني إلى أرضه ووطنه. السيد الرئيس، ففي الوقت الذي ندين الكيان المحتل ونأسف للشلل الذي أصاب مجلس الأمن، نحيي الدول الأعضاء الذين لم يقفوا مكتوفي الأيدي بل توجهوا إلى الجمعية العامة البيت الحاضن للمنظمة، ولذلك نشدد بأنه وإن كانت مسؤولية حفظ الأمن والسلم الدوليين تقع على عاتق مجلس الأمن في المقام الأول، إلا أن العجز الذي يعيشه وعدم اطلاعه بمسؤوليته الرئيسية وتنصله عن أخذ موقف واضح وصريح بسبب ازدواجية المعايير عند البعض، فإن الجمعية العامة قادرة على تحمل المسؤولية وأخذ زمام الأمور والدفع نحو الطريق لسلام عادل وشامل ودائم. وإن كان المجلس ما زال عاجزاً عن وضع حد لهذه المأساة التي استمرت لأكثر من 600 يوم، فعليه مسؤولية الالتزام بتنفيذ قراراته على أقل تقدير، وعلى وجه الخصوص القرار 2735 والذي يدعو من بين جملة أمور إلى وقف إطلاق النار الفوري والكامل والشامل، عودة المدنيين الفلسطينيين إلى منازلهم وأحيائهم في جميع مناطق غزة، التوزيع الآمن والفعال للمساعدات الإنسانية على نطاق واسع، رفض أي محاولة لتغيير الديمغرافي أو الإقليمي في قطاع غزة بما في ذلك أي إجراءات من شأنها تقليص مساحة غزة، الالتزام بحل الدولتين بما يتفق مع القانون الدولي وقرارات الأمم المتحدة ذات الصلة. وفي هذا السياق تثمن المجموعة الخليجية الجهود الحثيثة الذي تبذلها كل من دولة قطر وجمهورية مصر العربية علاوة على الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية في إطار المساعي الرامية إلى التوصل إلى اتفاق شامل لوقف إطلاق النار وتأمين الإفراج عن الرهائن والأسرى وضمان تدفق المساعدات الإنسانية إلى قطاع غزة بشكل آمن ومستدام. سيد الرئيس، في هذا الصدد سيعقد في الأسبوع القادم المؤتمر الدولي رفيع المستوى بشأن التسوية السلمية لقضية فلسطين وتنفيذ حل الدولتين برئاسة سعودية فرنسية مشتركة، وندعو كافة الدول الأعضاء للمشاركة بأعلى مستوى، ونحث الجميع على الاعتراف بالدولة الفلسطينية، فإن الجدوى والفائدة لدعم فلسطين تتضاعف مع الاعتراف بدولتهم المستقلة والموجودة بالفعل على مر التاريخ. كما أنه قد حان الوقت بأن تحصل دولة فلسطين على العضوية الكاملة في الأمم المتحدة، فإلى متى سيقبل المجتمع الدولي بازدواجية المعايير التي نراها إلا مع فلسطين؟ ونذكر هنا بأن قرار قبول عضوية إسرائيل في الأمم المتحدة يكتمل فقط عند قيام الدولة الفلسطينية، وعلى الدول الأعضاء المشاركة في المؤتمر أن تأتي بآليات ملموسة نحو تحميل إسرائيل القوة القائمة بالاحتلال المسؤولية القانونية تجاه ما قامت به من قتل ودمار فاق القدرة الاستيعابية البشرية والأخلاقية من خلال تطبيق القانون الدولي والقانون الدولي الإنساني، قرارات الجمعية العامة وقرارات مجلس الأمن وقرارات مجلس حقوق الإنسان والمحكمة الجنائية الدولية ومحكمة العدل الدولية ذات الصلة. كما أنه على القوة القائمة بالاحتلال أن تنهي احتلالها المستمر منذ العام 1967 بشكل فوري ووقف إجراءاتها التعسفية تجاه الشعب الفلسطيني في أرضه المحتلة، بالإضافة إلى إعادة الممتلكات لأصحابها الشرعيين وتقديم التعويضات للمتضررين من ممارساتها الباطلة وعدم شرعية المستوطنات الإسرائيلية والمستوطنين فيها. ختاماً، السيد الرئيس يؤكد مجلس التعاون على موقفه الثابت والراسخ والداعم للحق الفلسطيني، ويشدد على أن السبب الرئيسي للصراع هو وجود احتلال لا آفاق لنهايته، وأنه إذا أردنا سلاماً وأمناً يجب أن تحل القضية بما يضمن قيام الدولة الفلسطينية المستقلة ذات السيادة وعاصمتها القدس الشرقية على حدود 4 يونيو للعام 1967 وفق ما تم إقراره والاتفاق عليه عبر قرارات الشرعية الدولية ذات الصلة وقرارات مجلس الأمن ومبادرة السلام العربية لعام 2002. كما نشير إلى أهمية الاستعداد بخطة متكاملة لعودة السلطة الفلسطينية لقطاع غزة ورفض أي إجراءات لفصل قطاع غزة عن الضفة الغربية، ونشدد كذلك على أن أي أطروحات عن مستقبل قطاع غزة يجب أن تكون في سياق الدولة الفلسطينية الموحدة واعتماد نهج شمولي نحو مسار موثوق به لا رجع فيه لتنفيذ حل الدولتين. شكرا السيد الرئيس، والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
I thank the distinguished representative of Kuwait. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Yemen, who will speak on behalf of the Arab group.
السيد فيليمون يانغ رئيس الجمعية العامة للأمم المتحدة، يطيب لي أن ألقي هذا البيان نيابة عن المجموعة العربية، معربا عن تقديرنا العميق على استجابتكم السريعة لعقد الدورة الاستثنائية الطارئة العاشرة للجمعية العامة في ظل استمرار معاناة الشعب الفلسطيني تحت وطأة العدوان الإسرائيلي الغاشم وما يشهده قطاع غزة من كارثة إنسانية غير مسبوقة. نجتمع اليوم مرة أخرى تحت قبة هذه الجمعية لا لنكرر الحديث عن المأساة بل لنضع حداً لها. نجتمع لأن مجلس الأمن في 4 يونيو الجاري عجز عن اعتماد مشروع قرار إنساني بحت بسبب استخدام حق النقض رغم الدعم الواسع الذي حظي به من أعضاء المجلس. لقد طالب المشروع بوقف فوري ودائم وغير مشروط لإطلاق النار في غزة ورفع الحصار وإطلاق سراح الرهائن والأسرى وضمان إيصال المساعدات الإنسانية بأمان ودون عوائق إلى أكثر من 2 مليون إنسان محاصرين منذ شهور. السيد الرئيس، منذ أكثر من 600 يوم يتعرض قطاع غزة لحرب إبادة تتخذ أشكالاً متعددة من القصف والتدمير الممنهج والتجويع المتعمد إلى التهجير الغسري. ومنذ مارس الماضي فرضت إسرائيل القوة القائمة بالاحتلال حصاراً كاملاً منع من خلاله إدخال الغذاء والماء والدواء والوقود، مما أدى إلى شلل تام في الحياة في القطاع. ويواجه السكان المدنيون اليوم خطر المجاعة في ظل حرمان كامل من أبسط مقومات الحياة وغياب أي مظهر من مظاهر الكرامة الإنسانية في مشهد هز الضمير الإنساني وفاق كل وصف. يتوافد الآلاف من المدنيين المنهكين تحت القصف المستمر إلى نقاط توزيع المساعدات التي تدار وفقا لآلية إسرائيلية غير شرعية لا تلتزم بالمبادئ الإنسانية المعترف بها دولياً، بحثاً عن أبسط سبل البقاء، وهناك يواجهون الإذلال وسوء المعاملة، بل ويقعون في كثير من الحالات ضحايا لإطلاق النار والقتل المتعمد. وقد وثقت تقارير الأمم المتحدة والمنظمات الدولية وعدسات وسائل الإعلام هذه الانتهاكات الجسيمة المرتكبة بحق المدنيين العزل في خرق واضح وصارخ لأحكام القانون الدولي الإنساني والقانون الدولي. وفي مقابل ذلك تؤكد المجموعة العربية دعمها الكامل لآلية توزيع المساعدات الإنسانية التابعة للأمم المتحدة التي تقوم على احترام المبادئ الإنسانية الأساسية من حياد ونزاهة واستقلال، وتدعو إلى تمكينها من الوصول الآمن والمستدام. كما تحذر المجموعة من خطورة استخدام المساعدات كأداة للتهجير القسري وإعادة رسم الواقع الديمغرافي والاستيلاء على الأراضي بالقوة، مما يشكل انتهاكاً صارخاً للقانون الدولي وجرائم قد ترقى إلى جرائم حرب وجرائم ضد الإنسانية. لقد بلغ الوضع الإنساني في قطاع غزة مستوى كارثياً لم يعد بالإمكان تجاهله، فالمدنيون يواجهون حرماناً شاملاً من أبسط مقومات الحياة في ظل انهيار كامل للبنى التحتية والخدمات الأساسية، بما في ذلك النظام الصحي وإمدادات المياه والكهرباء والمرافق التعليمية. وقد حذرت الأمم المتحدة من أن مستويات الحرمان في القطاع أمست غير مسبوقة، وأن الحصار الإسرائيلي المفروض يعد عقاباً جماعياً غير مقبول يمارس بحق الشعب بأكمله في انتهاك صارخ للقانون الدولي والقانون الدولي الإنساني. السيد الرئيس، تؤكد المجموعة العربية أن ما يجري في قطاع غزة لا يمكن اعتباره صراعاً مسلحاً تقليدياً، بل هو مأساة إنسانية متكاملة الأركان تتطلب تحركاً عاجلاً وفعالاً من الأمم المتحدة ولا سيما من هذه الجمعية الموقرة. إن فشل مجلس الأمن في الاطلاع بمسؤولياته نتيجة استخدام حق النقض لا يسقط عن المجتمع الدولي ولا عن الدول كافة واجبها في التحرك، بل يجعل هذا الواجب أكثر إلحاحاً ومسؤولية حفاظاً على السلم والأمن الدوليين وصوناً لمبادئ القانون الدولي والعدالة الإنسانية. وفي هذا السياق تشيد المجموعة العربية بالإجراءات القانونية والسياسية والعملية التي اتخذتها بعض الدول استناداً إلى التزاماتها بموجب القانون الدولي، بما في ذلك فرض العقوبات وتقييد العلاقات مع سلطات الاحتلال الإسرائيلي رداً على الانتهاكات الجسيمة المرتكبة في قطاع غزة. كما تدعو المجموعة العربية بقية الدول إلى الحذو حذوها واتخاذ خطوات ملموسة تتضمن محاسبة مرتكبي هذه الجرائم وتسهم في الضغط من أجل وقف الانتهاكات ورفع الحصار وضمان الحماية الكاملة للمدنيين انسجاماً مع ميثاق الأمم المتحدة ومبادئ القانون الدولي وأسس العدالة الدولية. وتشدد المجموعة العربية على أهمية مواصلة مساءلة إسرائيل القوة القائمة بالاحتلال وضمان انصياعها للقانون الدولي، بما في ذلك القانون الدولي الإنساني والقانون الدولي لحقوق الإنسان. وتدعو المجموعة كافة الدول الأعضاء إلى اتخاذ جميع الإجراءات اللازمة كما ورد في الفقرة 10 من مشروع القرار المعروض على الجمعية العامة لضمان امتثال إسرائيل لالتزاماتها الدولية ووضع حد لانتهاكاتها ومحاسبة المسؤولين عنها، بما يعزز مصداقية النظام الدولي القائم على القواعد القانونية الملزمة لجميع الدول دون استثناء. في هذا السياق تثمن المجموعة العربية عالياً الجهود الحثيثة التي تبذلها كل من جمهورية مصر العربية ودولة قطر والولايات المتحدة الأمريكية في إطار المساعي الرامية إلى التوصل إلى اتفاق شامل لوقف إطلاق النار وتأمين الإفراج عن الرهائن والأسرى وضمان تدفق المساعدات الإنسانية إلى قطاع غزة بشكل آمن ومستدام. وتشدد المجموعة على أهمية البناء على هذه المبادرات وتعزيزها بما يسهم في وضع حد للكارثة الإنسانية المتواصلة ويمهد الطريق نحو معالجة جذور النزاع من خلال إنهاء الاحتلال واستقلال دولة فلسطين وفقا إلى مبادئ القانون الدولي وقرارات الأمم المتحدة ذات الصلة. السيد الرئيس، تجدد المجموعة العربية تأكيدها على أن أي تسوية عادلة ودائمة للصراع الفلسطيني الإسرائيلي لن تتحقق دون إنهاء الاحتلال الإسرائيلي كافة الأراضي الفلسطينية والعربية المحتلة بما فيها القدس الشرقية، وتمكين الشعب الفلسطيني من ممارسة حقوقه غير القابلة للتصرف، وعلى رأسها حقه في تقرير المصير واستقلال دولته ذات السيادة على حدود 4 من حزيران 67 وعاصمتها القدس الشرقية وفقا لقرارات الشرعية الدولية ومبادرات السلام العربية. ولا بد لنا أن نشدد أيضا على وجوب احترام الوضع القانوني والتاريخي القائم للمقدسات الإسلامية والمسيحية في مدينة القدس. تعرب المجموعة العربية عن بالغ تقديرها للمملكة العربية السعودية والجمهورية الفرنسية على قيادتهما ورئاستهما المشتركة للمؤتمر الدولي رفيع المستوى المعني بحل الدولتين، وتثني على رؤيتهما السياسية وجهودهما الدبلوماسية الهادفة إلى إحياء المسار الدولي نحو تسوية عادلة وشاملة للقضية الفلسطينية. كما تقدر المجموعة عاليا إسهامات رؤساء مجموعات العمل في إعداد الوثيقة الختامية التي تعد خطوة مهمة نحو تفعيل قرارات الشرعية الدولية ذات الصلة ضمن إطار زمني واضح وملزم. وتؤكد أن المؤتمر يشكل محطة مفصلية تفتح آفاق حقيقية لإنهاء الاحتلال الإسرائيلي وتمكين الشعب الفلسطيني من إقامة دولة المستقلة وعاصمتها القدس الشرقي. وتشيد المجموعة بالنهج العملي الذي يعتمده المؤتمر من خلال آلية مجموعات العمل الثمانية، والتي تناولت بصورة شاملة الجوانب السياسية والأمنية القانونية والاقتصادية والتنموية، بما في ذلك إعادة الإعمار باعتباره إطاراً متكاملاً لبناء الثقة وتعزيز فرص تحقيق السلام العادل. وتشدد المجموعة على ضرورة ترجمة نتائج المؤتمر إلى خطوات عملية ملموسة تعيد الزخم إلى العملية السياسية وتسهم في استعادة مصداقية النظام الدولي القائم على القانون والعدالة. تدعو المجموعة العربية كافة الدول الأعضاء في الجمعية العامة إلى التصويت لصالح مشروع القرار المعروض الذي يعكس الإرادة الجماعية لغالبية أعضاء مجلس الأمن والمجتمع الدولي، ويتضمن مطالب إنسانية عاجلة تتمثل في الوقف الفوري والدائم وغير المشروط لإطلاق النار والإفراج عن الرهائن والأسرى ورفع الحصار الكامل عن قطاع غزة وضمان وصول المساعدات الإنسانية دون عوائق واستعادة الخدمات الأساسية والانسحاب الكامل لقوات الاحتلال الإسرائيلي من قطاع غزة وفقا لأحكام القانون الدولي الإنساني والمبادئ الإنساني المتعارف عليها. كما يطالب بإنهاء سياسة التجويع والتهجير والضم وتوسيع المستوطنات وهدم المنازل وصولا إلى إنهاء الاحتلال وتحقيق السلام. أن المجموعة العربية على ثقة أن التصويت لصالح هذا القرار سيمثل رسالة قوية من المجتمع الدولي مفادها أن العالم لم ينس وأن صوت الضمير ما زال حيا وأن الشعب الفلسطيني رغم المحنة ليس وحده. السيدات والسادة، أن الشعوب لا تقهر بالقوة ولا تمحى حقوقها بمرور الزمن، وأن الكرامة الإنسانية لا تقمع بالحصار ولا تكتث بالغصب. إن هذه الجمعية بصفتها الضمير الحي للأمم المتحدة مدعوة اليوم للانتصار للقانون وللعدالة وللقيم الإنسانية التي قامت عليها هذه المنظمة. شكرا السيد الرئيس.
I thank the distinguished representative of Yemen. The Assembly will now proceed to consider draft Resolution A/10/L34/Revision 1. For your information, the draft resolution has closed for e-sponsorship. I now give the floor to the representative of the Secretariat.
Mr. President, I should like to announce that since the submission of the draft resolution, and in addition to the delegations listed on the L document, the following countries have also become co-sponsors of A/ES10/L34/Revision 1. Bahrain, Bangladesh, Brunei Darussalam, Comoros, Cuba, Djibouti, Finland, Gambia, Honduras, Kuwait, Lao People's Democratic Republic, Maldives, Mauritania, Namibia, Oman, Pakistan, Portugal, Senegal, Sudan, Sweden, United Arab Emirates, Vietnam, and Yemen. If any other countries wish to co-sponsor A/ES10/L34/Revision 1, please signify by pressing the microphone button now. Mr. President, I see Guinea, Denmark, and Somalia. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of the Secretariat. The Assembly will now proceed to take action on draft resolution A/ES10/L34/Revision 1. Before giving the floor for explanations of vote before the vote, may I remind delegations that explanations of vote are limited to 10 minutes and should be made by delegations from their seats. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Russian Federation.
Господин председатель, уважаемые коллеги, за 20 месяцев, в течение которых идут военные действия в секторе Газа, в этом зале в рамках заседаний 10-й чрезвычайной спецсессии уже высказаны все оценки и использованы, наверное, все возможные эпитеты для описания той нечеловеческой трагедии, которая разворачивается в анклаве. Было время, когда мир ужасался тому, что счет погибших в секторе Газа приближался к 15, 20, 30 тысячам человек. На данный момент их почти в 2 раза больше, 55 тысяч. 125 тысяч раненых, из которых как минимум 50 тысяч дети. Число погибших гумработников приближается к 450 человек. Эти цифры просто не укладываются в голове, тем более, что за ними скрывается гибель отнюдь не вооруженных до зубов боевиков, угрожающих мирным израильтянам, а простых палестинцев, укрывающихся в школах, больницах и лагерях беженцев, стоящих в очередях за гуманитарной помощью. Все они невинные жертвы безжалостной вооруженной операции Израиля, поклявшегося искоренить Хамас из сектора Газа любой ценой, невзирая на любые страдания палестинского населения. При этом Израилю так и не удалось нанести военное поражение движению Хамас, остающемуся единственной реальной силой, контролирующей ситуацию в анклаве. Как показал опыт, не решается военными методами и задача освобождения заложников, большую часть которых удалось вызволить из плена путем переговоров. К сожалению, вновь зашли в тупик и непрямые переговоры между Израилем и Хамас, высветившие диаметрально противоположные подходы к модальностям возможных договоренностей о прекращении огня и освобождении заложников. В этих условиях долг международного сообщества сделать все необходимое для скорейшей остановки кровопролития в Газе. Ценим решимость и последовательность непостоянных членов Совета Безопасности ООН, выступивших неделю назад с проектом резолюции, направленным на немедленное и безусловное прекращение огня, освобождение всех заложников и насильственно удерживаемых лиц, а также обеспечение беспрепятственного гуманитарного доступа в Газу в соответствии с нормами и принципами международного гуманитарного права. Это был достойный документ, который мог привести к реальным позитивным подвижкам на земле. Россия, как и остальные ответственные члены Совета Безопасности, его поддержала. Крайне разочарованы, что Совету из-за очередного вето Вашингтона так и не удалось его принять. Вместе с тем, сегодня у международного сообщества есть еще один шанс направить необходимый сигнал сторонам конфликта, пусть и в форме резолюции Генеральной Ассамблеи. Соответствующий проект, представленный Испанией, содержит основные положения заветированного на прошлой неделе документа. Требование немедленного, безусловного и постоянного прекращения огня, освобождение всех заложников, снятие блокады с Газы. Его цели носят исключительно гуманитарный характер и сосредоточены на самом главном – прекращении уносящей все новые человеческие жизни бойни в секторе. Важно и то, что этот документ выходит за рамки парадигмы текущего обострения палестино-израильского конфликта и очерчивает видение международным сообществом единственного возможного будущего, при котором больше не будет рецидивов вооруженного противостояния. Речь идет о восстановлении Газы на основе арабо-исламского плана и претворении в жизнь двугосударственного решения в соответствии с общепризнанной международно-правовой основой, при котором Израиль и Палестина будут жить в мире друг с другом. В этом будущем нет места насильственным перемещениям, демографическим или территориальным изменениям, строительству незаконных поселений, как нет места и терроризму, и насилию. Господин председатель, Россия будет голосовать за представленный проект резолюции и призывает поступить также всех, кто не на словах, а на деле выступает за скорейшее разрешение самого затяжного в мире конфликта, без чего достижение долгосрочного мира и процветания на Ближнем Востоке останется миражом. Кроме того, принятие этого документа задаст правильный импульс стартующей на следующей неделе конференции высокого уровня по БВУ, от которой все мы ждем конкретных и практических результатов. Намерены принять в ней самое активное участие. Благодарю вас.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Russian Federation. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the United States.
Thank you, President Yang. Today's emergency special session marks yet another failure on the part of the United Nations to condemn Hamas. We remain incensed that just yesterday, Hamas murdered 5 Palestinian civilians working to distribute aid for the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. The resolution being considered does nothing to free the hostages, improve the lives of civilians in Gaza, or bring us closer to a ceasefire, and is yet another performative action that erodes the credibility of this body. This draft resolution sends an unacceptable message to Hamas and other Iran-backed terrorist proxies. And that message is, you will be rewarded for taking hostages, diverting aid, and launching attacks from civilian areas. Mr. President, colleagues, blind support to Hamas by the members of this body further undermines the meaningful diplomacy underway to free the hostages and emboldens Hamas as the terrorist group continues to reject ceasefire proposals accepted by Israel. As the United States has made clear time and time again, we do not support one-sided measures that fail to condemn Hamas. We will not support resolutions that do not call for violent terrorist groups to disarm and leave Gaza and fail to recognize Israel's right to defend itself. It would be a better use of time for this body to support the diplomatic efforts currently underway to free the remaining 53 hostages, many of whom are nationals of member states of this body, and remain in deplorable conditions for the last 615 days. Instead, the UN is wasting valuable time, energy, and resources on yet another biased resolution that rewards Hamas. Let us be clear. This resolution does nothing to bring calm to Gaza. It also does nothing to advance a realistic diplomatic solution to further the cause of peace. It is rife with serious defects. This resolution fails to acknowledge Israel has the right to defend itself. As we have made clear, any measure that undercuts our allies' security is a non-starter for the United States. This resolution draws false equivalence between Israel and Hamas, which is not only morally reprehensible, but also naive and dangerous. This resolution seeks an immediate, unconditional, and permanent ceasefire that would leave Hamas in a position to carry out future October 7th attacks. Mr. President, no one wants to see Palestinian civilians in Gaza go hungry or thirsty. Yet this resolution fails to acknowledge the shortcomings of the prior method of aid delivery, which allowed Hamas to enrich itself at the expense of the Palestinian civilians it purports to represent. We reiterate our call for the UN, NGOs, and partners to support the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation to help it safely deliver aid without allowing Hamas to pilfer those resources. Hamas continues to weaponize the suffering of civilians in Gaza, murdering Palestinians as they did just yesterday and injuring many others in another desperate bid to obstruct the delivery of aid and maintain control. This resolution falsely accuses Israel of the use of starvation as a method of warfare, while at the same time ignoring Gaza Humanitarian Foundation efforts to cut out Hamas and deliver aid consistent with the humanitarian principles of humanity, neutrality, impartiality, and independence. This resolution callously demands that Israel end its blockade on Gaza while conveniently ignoring the fact that Hamas, which committed the worst massacre of Jews since the Holocaust and abducted 251 people on October 7, 2023, continues to pose an active threat to Israeli civilians and to brutally suppress protests against its own despotic rule. It also fails to recognize the extensive measures undertaken by Israel to mitigate harm to civilians in Gaza, even as Hamas continues to use non-combatants as human shields. Mr. President, the United States will support a future for the people in Gaza that is free of Hamas and full of opportunity. We will do our part to help forge this new reality alongside Israel and our Arab partners. A durable peace between Israelis and Palestinians and a more prosperous future for all of the region's people will only be possible through direct negotiations between the parties and not unilaterally imposed from afar. We urge fellow members to call out Hamas for what is the biggest impediment toward a life of prosperity for the people living in Gaza. We urge members to vote against this biased resolution, which will further inflame tensions at a time when negotiators are continuing their efforts to secure a durable ceasefire in Gaza. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of the United States. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Libya.
Mr. President, Libya would like to thank Spain and the core group for presenting this draft resolution in this timely manner. Ladies and gentlemen, the world stands yet again to be tested in a moment of truth, as it is being on the edge of moral collapse. A nation buried beneath rubble and ash. For over 600 days, Gaza has been subjected to a brutal onslaught, a genocide broadcast in real time, yet unanswered by the consciousness of humanity. Over 55,000 souls extinguished, 125,000 wounded, and generations scarred beyond recognition.
wounds that will never heal. If I would name the names of all of those, I would need days to do so. If I would have bring pictures of those, this chamber will not be enough to show them. This is not collateral damage. This is not a tragedy of war. This is a deliberate act of ethnic cleansing and calculated dismantling of a nation. These are the words of officials from the occupied Israeli forces, who many have been sanctioned by countries in this world. The bombs do not discriminate. Tents, hospitals, homes, aid convoys, nothing is spared. Children buried beneath rubble, entire families burned alive and vaporized, some with not a single survivor to carry their names forward. Talking about stories, a mother, Dr. Ala al-Najjar, you all know her story, returns from saving lives at a hospital to find her own 9 children and husband massacred. Her story is not an exception. This became the norm, and the list goes on. This is not a war. It is an annihilation in daylight, a genocide emboldened by political shields and the deadly comfort of inaction. The international community watches paralyzed as a veto in the Security Council strangles justice. Gaza is now a wasteland and a mass grave for children. Its people displaced from north to south and back again with nowhere safe to go. Starvation is not a byproduct. It is a weapon of war. Food and water are withheld, malnutrition is weaponized against newborns, and aid is turned into bait in a concentration camp where fathers are executed for chasing a bag of flour to go back to their hungry children. And still, no accountability and no justice. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the moment of moral reckoning, and silence is complicity. Humanity is bleeding in Gaza, and the world must choose to uphold the law, dignity, and life, or to betray them all. It is time. It is time to break the silence. It is time to end the siege. Time to stop this madness, and time to stand with Palestine. History did not start on October the 7th. This is a struggle of 7 decades and still ongoing. Libya asks you to vote in favor of this resolution to help end this vicious cycle. Those pressing on the red button today to vote against this resolution will become a bloodstain on their fingers. This is going to be registered on this voting table in front of you, and it will be a testimony of your moral compass and double standards. This is not only a Palestinian tragedy, it is a global moral emergency to stop this 21st century genocide. All lives matters. All innocent lives matter, no matter which part you're from. So will you be on the right side of history, or will you let Gaza be your generation's shame for eternity? The choice is yours. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished representative of Libya, and I give the floor to the distinguished representative for Paraguay.
Gracias, señor presidente. El Paraguay confía en el rol insustituible de esta Asamblea como espacio para la búsqueda de soluciones pacíficas basadas en el derecho internacional con una visión sostenida de largo plazo. Venimos con una voluntad firme y legítima de aportar, con argumentos de fondo y sin dobles discursos, a una resolución que promueve resultados efectivos. En este caso, el cese real de hostilidades, la protección de todos los civiles y del personal humanitario desplegado. El Paraguay votará en contra del proyecto de resolución que nos convoca hoy, con pesar, pero con convicción. Con pesar, porque compartimos el profundo anhelo de paz y de cese inmediato de las hostilidades. Con convicción, porque creemos que este texto no contribuye a lograrlo. Nuestro rechazo se funda en una observación de fondo. Esta resolución, cuyo texto no fue sometido a un proceso inclusivo de negociaciones, carece del equilibrio mínimo necesario para representar una herramienta útil en la búsqueda de la paz. En primer lugar, el conflicto en Gaza involucra más de una parte, pero el texto responsabiliza de manera exclusiva al Estado de Israel. Esto no es una interpretación, es una constatación. El nombre de Hamás no aparece ni una sola vez en todo el documento, a pesar de haber lanzado ataques, retener y matar rehenes y violar las normas del derecho internacional humanitario. Este silencio selectivo mina la credibilidad del texto y socava cualquier aspiración de una solución duradera. En ese sentido, el Paraguay ha sido claro en su postura. Ya en 2019 designó a Hamás como una organización terrorista de alcance regional en coherencia con su compromiso con la lucha contra el terrorismo y con la defensa del derecho internacional humanitario. Nos resulta difícil comprender cómo una resolución que pretende contribuir a la paz omite siquiera mencionar a quienes tienen responsabilidad directa en el desencadenamiento y la prolongación de esta tragedia. En segundo lugar, si bien se menciona el cese al fuego, el lenguaje predominante es condenatorio y se articula en torno a una narrativa que ya ha sido promovida en ocasiones anteriores sin resultados. Insistir en el mismo enfoque no ha logrado detener el conflicto ni evitar el sufrimiento humano. Al contrario, ha contribuido a profundizar la parálisis del multilateralismo. No nos corresponde juzgar intenciones, sí nos corresponde juzgar y evaluar las consecuencias. Y la consecuencia de textos como el que se votará hoy es clara: polarización, estancamiento diplomático y deslegitimación creciente de la Asamblea General como un foro para la paz. Sabemos que todos los estados aquí presentes tenemos no el derecho, sino también la obligación de contribuir con una solución sostenible de largo plazo. Sabemos que también existe una voluntad legítima de ser parte de esa solución, pero lamentablemente la propuesta que hoy se somete a nuestra consideración no acoge esa voluntad colectiva. Por ello, reconocemos el esfuerzo negociador llevado adelante por Egipto, Estados Unidos y Qatar para lograr avances concretos en este difícil contexto y expresamos nuestro deseo de que concluyan de manera exitosa y pronta. En momentos en que esta organización ha demostrado una preocupante inoperancia para obtener resultados tangibles, promover estos esfuerzos trilaterales, donde entendemos que las preocupaciones e intereses de los involucrados en el conflicto están representados, podría ser efectivo para las aspiraciones de paz de esta organización. El Paraguay desea el cese de la violencia, que se libere a todos los rehenes, que fluya la ayuda humanitaria y que se respete el derecho internacional. Queremos creer que esa resolución también aspira a esos objetivos, pero reconocemos que el proyecto fracasa porque adopta una perspectiva parcial. Finalmente, y luego de todo esto, permítame reafirmar que el Paraguay seguirá apoyando iniciativas sinceras, equilibradas y eficaces para lograr la paz y la protección de todos los civiles. Gracias, señor presidente.
I thank the distinguished representative of Paraguay. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Tunisia.
السيد الرئيس، رغم تحفظاته على بعض الفقرات ستصوت تونس لصالح هذا القرار باعتبار مطالبته بالوقف الفوري والدائم وغير المشروط لإطلاق النار ورفع الحصار الكامل على قطاع غزة وضمان وصول المساعدات الإنسانية دون عوائق والانسحاب الكامل لجيش الاحتلال من قطاع غزة. إن اعتماد مثل هذا القرار مهم، ولكن من الأهم السهر على تنفيذه وتنفيذ بقية القرارات السابقة، ونجدد مطالبتنا بتحرك دولي فوري فاعل ومسؤول بعيدا عن الحلول التي تكون على القياس. ففي الوقت الذي يتقدم فيه المجتمع الإنساني على المجتمع الدولي يجب علينا توفير الحماية للشعب الفلسطيني ووضع حد لجريمة الإبادة التي يتعرض لها ومحاسبة مرتكبيها. من المفارقات أن يتزامن الاحتفال بالذكرى 80 لإنشاء منظمة الأمم المتحدة مع تواصل مأساة الشعب الفلسطيني واستمرار الاحتلال والاستعمار في ظل التآكل التدريجي لكل المبادئ التي تحمي كرامة الإنسان وحياته، وفي ظل الانتهاكات المتواصلة لقوات الاحتلال ومساعديها، والذي واجه البعض منهم الاستعمار. إن الجرائم اليومية التي ترتكبها قوات الاحتلال ضد الشعب الفلسطيني تستهدف الإبادة والقضاء على الإرادة في التحرير، وهو عكس الهدف الأصلي لإنشاء منظمة الأمم المتحدة. وعلى البعض ألا يتناسى عمدا بأن احتلال الأراضي الفلسطينية والاستعمار لم يبدأ سنة 2023، وأن الأسباب التاريخية لهذا الاحتلال وغايته معروفة لدى الجميع، إلا أن بعض الأطراف لم تستخلص بعد دروس التاريخ الذي يعيد نفسه اليوم وسط عجز يفرض بدون أي مبرر على المجتمع الدولي. وتجدد تونس دعمها الثابت والمبدئي وغير المشروط للشعب الفلسطيني في نضاله من أجل استرجاع حقوقه المشروعة وغير القابلة للتصرف، وفي مقدمتها إقامة دولته المستقلة كاملة السيادة على كل أرض فلسطين وعاصمتها القدس الشريف.
I thank the distinguished representative of Tunisia. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Canada.
President, dear colleagues, Canada will be voting in favor of this resolution today. We will be voting yes. Because of the urgent need to secure a ceasefire, the release of all hostages, and the resumption of UN-led humanitarian aid delivery in Gaza on a scale that will actually meet the need of a people that have been deprived of adequate food for many months. It is incontrovertible, undeniable, that the humanitarian situation in Gaza is intolerable and has to be addressed immediately. The level of civilian casualties is abhorrent. The politicization of aid, of humanitarian assistance of any kind, is unacceptable, and the blockade of aid is illegal. All parties have to comply with their obligations under international humanitarian law, as do all of us, including the protection of civilians. United Nations and humanitarian personnel must be protected. The parties to this conflict, and again, all of us, have an obligation to facilitate the rapid and unimpeded passage of humanitarian aid for Palestinian civilians that are in need. The fighting must stop. The hostages must be freed. The real negotiations about the future must start just as we deliver humanitarian aid to all who need it as quickly as possible. Having said this, Canada once again must say that we profoundly regret that this resolution does not, with explicit language, condemn Hamas's horrific terrorist attacks on October the 7th, 2023, in which over 1,200 people were killed. The taking of hostages, many of whom were killed, still remain in captivity and is entirely unacceptable to us, and frankly, I think to this Assembly. The first time we voted on this issue, Canada moved an amendment to include reference to Hamas. It was supported by over 60% of the people who were voting, representing countries in the chamber. It should be possible for us to do it again, and I'm sorry we're not possible for that to happen today. For our part, we continue to condemn Hamas unequivocally. It is a listed terrorist entity in Canada for its acts of terror, and we call for the immediate and unconditional release of all remaining hostages. Il est clair que le Hamas doit désarmer et que l'organisation ne peut jouer aucun rôle dans la future gouvernance de Gaza. Tous les Palestiniens méritent d'être dirigés par un gouvernement légitime et représentatif, sans la participation d'une organisation terroriste. Notre vote ne dévie pas de notre soutien indéfectible à la sécurité d'Israël. Nous continuons à vouloir une amitié forte avec le peuple d'Israël fondée sur nos liens, nos valeurs et notre engagement commun en faveur de sa sécurité et de son avenir et l'avenir de son voisin. We also remain firmly committed to the two-state solution, the only viable pathway to the enduring peace and security that Israelis and Palestinians alike deserve. We will be discussing these issues in greater depth next week. But we believe firmly that the day in which two states can live side by side in security must come soon and must come closer. A day when we can speak the words shalom and salam together in peace, in respect, in dignity, and security. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished representative of Canada. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Iraq.
شكرا السيد الرئيس. في البداية نتقدم بالشكر إلى وفد مملكة إسبانيا لتقديمها مشروع القرار، تأكيدا على موقف العراق الثابت والمبدئي تجاه القضية الفلسطينية العادلة، وانطلاقا من التزامه بمبادئ ميثاق الأمم المتحدة وأحكام القانون الدولي. سيصوت العراق لصالح مشروع القرار A/ES/10/L/34-1، والذي يعكس دعما واضحا لمطالب الشعب الفلسطيني وحقوقه غير القابلة للتصرف، وعلى رأسها حقه في تقرير المصير وإنهاء الاحتلال. أن تصويت العراق لصالح مشروع القرار يأتي تأكيدا على دعوته لوقف فوري ودائم لإطلاق النار في قطاع غزة وباقي الأراضي الفلسطينية المحتلة، ولضمان إيصال المساعدات الإنسانية بشكل فوري وبدون شروط أو عوائق، انسجاما مع مبادئ القانون الدولي الإنساني. وفي الوقت ذاته يسجل العراق تحفظه على بعض المصطلحات الواردة في بعض الفقرات المذكورة في القرار، نظرا لتعارض مضامينها مع التشريعات الوطنية ومع الموقف العراقي المبدئي حيال القضية الفلسطينية. السيد الرئيس، لقد تجاوزت جرائم قوات الاحتلال الإسرائيلي كل الحدود الإنسانية والأخلاقية والقانونية، وسقطت جميع الحجج الواهية التي تبرر هذه الجرائم، إذ لم يعد هنالك مجال للحديث عن حق الدفاع عن النفس عندما تتحول المدن إلى أنقاض والمستشفيات إلى مقابر. لقد كشفت الأيام أن الهدف الحقيقي هو إفراغ الأرض من أهلها وتدمير كل ما يجعل الحياة ممكنة في فلسطين. فأي قانون الدولي وأي مبادئ إنسانية هذه التي تسمح بإبادة شعب بأكمله وتدمير المستشفيات وتصمت أمام تجويع شعب بأكمله؟ أي ضمير عالمي هذا الذي يقف عاجزا أمام مشاهد الأطفال المشوهين تحت الأنقاض؟ إن ما يحدث في فلسطين اليوم ليس نزاعا، بل هو إبادة جماعية بكل المعايير، فالأرقام تتحدث عن نفسها. السيد الرئيس، يجدد العراق دعمه الكامل للجهود الدولية الرامية إلى إنهاء الاحتلال الإسرائيلي ودعم حق الشعب الفلسطيني في تقرير مصيره وإقامة دولته المستقلة وعاصمتها القدس الشريف. شكرا جزيلا.
I thank the distinguished representative of Iraq. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of India.
Mr. President, this resolution comes against the backdrop of the worsening humanitarian situation in Gaza. India is deeply concerned at this deepening humanitarian crisis, and we condemn the loss of civilian lives. I would like to stress that India has always been on the side of peace and humanity. We have repeatedly called for protection of civilians and upholding of humanitarian obligations. We call for safe, sustained, and timely supply of humanitarian assistance to the people of Gaza. On our part, India has always provided humanitarian assistance to the people of Gaza, both bilaterally and through the United Nations. We also believe that release of remaining hostages and a ceasefire are important to ameliorate the humanitarian situation in Gaza. Our collective voice should echo this. India's abiding commitment to dialogue and diplomacy is well known, and we firmly believe that this is the only way forward. Continuing accusations, and argumentation hinder the path to peace. India has always supported a negotiated two-state solution to the Israel-Palestine issue, leading to the establishment of a sovereign, independent, and viable state of Palestine living within secure and recognized borders, side by side, in peace with Israel. For this, we need to work towards creating conditions for early resumption of direct peace negotiations. We hope this August Assembly will send a clear message to expand the prospect for dialogue and diplomacy towards restoration of peace and bringing the humanitarian crisis in Gaza to an end. Mr. President, India had earlier abstained in the vote on resolutions A/RES/77/247 and A/RES/79/232. Our vote today is in continuation of this, in the belief that there is no other way to resolve conflicts but through dialogue and diplomacy. Our joint effort should be directed towards bringing the two sides closer. For these reasons, we would abstain on this resolution. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of India. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Latvia.
Mr. President, today Latvia will vote yes on the resolution A/ES 10/L34/Rev1 on the protection of civilians and upholding legal and humanitarian obligations, because we strongly support the humanitarian principles enshrined in this resolution. We regret that the resolution adopted does not include a clear and direct condemnation of Hamas, designated terrorist organization by many UN member states. And we condemn in the strongest possible terms the brutal and indiscriminate attacks of Hamas across Israel on 7 October 2023. And we call for the immediate release of hostages without preconditions. We also reiterate our recognition of the right of Israel to defend itself in line with the international law and international humanitarian law. Mr. President, the ongoing deadly violence only corroborates the need for a political horizon, ensuring lasting peace and security for both Israelis and Palestinians. Latvia continues to believe that the two-state solution, in line with the international parameters, is the only sustainable way to ensure peace, security, and prosperity for both Israelis and Palestinians. The international community should strive to create the conditions for resuming direct negotiations towards the same. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Latvia. Ladies and gentlemen, we suspend for 5 minutes. the country. Ladies and gentlemen, the meeting is resumed. We have heard the last speaker in explanation of vote before the vote. Do I have to suspend? I have been informed that the State of Palestine would like to speak on a point of order. Palestine, you may take the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President, for giving me the floor. I would ask you to give the people 2 minutes to get back to their seats in a point of order so that we can make sure that those who went for a few minutes for the short break that you requested to be able to assemble back in their seats. And I thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thank you very much. We'll give them 2 minutes. You can begin to count the minutes now. I repeat what I said. We have heard the last speaker in explanation of vote before the vote. Before proceeding to take a decision on the draft resolution, I wish to address the question concerning the majority required for the adoption of the draft resolution. Considering Article 18, paragraph 2 and 3 of the Charter of the United Nations, is there any objection to taking action on draft resolution A/ES10/L34/revision 1 by a 2/3 majority of the members present and voting? I see no objection. The two-thirds majority of members present and voting is therefore required for the adoption of the draft resolution A/ES10/L34/revision 1. The Assembly will now take a decision on draft resolution A/ES10/L34/revision 1 entitled, and I quote, "Protection of Civilians and Upholding Legal and Humanitarian Obligations," end of quote. A recorded vote has been requested. We shall now begin the voting process. Those in favor of draft resolution A/ES10/L34/revision 1, please signify. Those against? Abstentions?
The General Assembly is now voting on draft resolution A/ES10/L34 revision 1 entitled Protection of Civilians and Upholding Legal and Humanitarian Obligations. Will all delegations confirm that their votes are accurately reflected on the screen? The voting has been completed. Please lock the machine.
The result of the vote is as follows. In favor, 149. Against, 12. Abstentions, 19. Draft resolution A/ES10/L34/revision 1 is adopted. Before giving the floor for explanations of vote after the vote, may I remind delegations that explanations of vote are limited to 10 minutes and should be made by delegations from their seats. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Japan.
Thank you, Mr. President. At the outset, I wish to convey our appreciation to the Kingdom of Spain for its leadership. This initiative is timely, particularly at the moment when the people of Gaza have been enduring unconscionable human suffering marked by ever-intensifying hostilities and restrictions on humanitarian aid. Japan voted in favor of the draft resolution as its core values are in alignment with the steadfast position of my country. Namely, it is imperative to achieve an immediate ceasefire, immediate and unconditional release of all remaining hostages, and unfettered humanitarian access throughout Gaza. Moreover, we must uphold the relevant principles of international law, especially the obligation to protect civilians, an essential principle rightly underscored in this resolution. That being said, the present resolution should have contained an unequivocal condemnation of heinous acts of terror perpetrated by Hamas and other militant groups. We must not forget the suffering of the innocent victims of this barbaric crime and that of their loved ones. Japan supports the mediation efforts of the United States, Qatar, and Egypt, and urges all parties to return to negotiations and make sincere efforts to end unfolding nightmare. From this standpoint, Japan has been taking concrete actions, including ministerial-level communication with Israel. During the meeting of the Japanese and the Israeli foreign ministers in Tokyo last month, Foreign Minister Iwaya Takeshi directly conveyed Japan's serious concerns to his Israeli counterpart, urging full adherence to international law, including international humanitarian law. Mr. President, resolutions remain mere words on paper if they are not properly implemented. It is our sincere hope that today's adoption will translate into meaningful and tangible progress on the ground. But ultimately, the only viable path to resolving this tragic decade-long conflict is a negotiated two-state solution where Israel and the independent Palestinian state can coexist side by side in peace and security. In this regard, Japan looks forward to the forthcoming high-level conference on the two-state solution. We are honored to co-chair one of the working groups alongside our esteemed Norwegian colleagues, and we remain firmly committed to contributing a just and lasting peace in the Middle East. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Japan. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Liechtenstein.
Mr. President, we thank you for your timely convening of this emergency special session after the veto cast by the United States on a resolution supported by the other 14 members of the Security Council last week. We appreciate the special report adopted by the Council after that veto and hope that the Council will continue to demonstrate its continued accountability to the membership when it fails to uphold its primary responsibility for the maintenance of peace and security set out in the Charter. I want to take this opportunity to explain Liechtenstein's vote in favor of the resolution just adopted entitled Protection of Civilians and Upholding Legal and Humanitarian Obligations. Mr. President, Liechtenstein thanks Spain and Palestine for bringing forward the draft text and for the constructive spirit of negotiations which have allowed for changes to be made to it over the past week. Indeed, we believe that the ongoing conflict is an overwhelming failure of civilian protection. As we speak, Palestinians are starving in conditions close to famine under a blockade imposed by Israel in violation of its obligation under international humanitarian law, with no recognizable plan to get humanitarian aid into the hands of civilians. Hostages still languish in the detention of armed groups in furtherance of a grave breach of international humanitarian law. The situation so clearly demonstrates the obvious: there is no military solution. There is only a political solution. This is why we meet here today. Mr. President, Liechtenstein again calls on all parties and all those with influence on them to let the UN do its job. This organization has the ability fundamentally to keep people alive. The last few weeks have demonstrated that it is not possible to replace or substitute the life-saving work of UNRWA at scale. All United Nations and humanitarian personnel must be able to do this work. It is the least that can be done to save the civilian population in Gaza. All actors must fulfill their obligations under international law, notably international humanitarian law, in this regard. Liechtenstein also notes the importance of the upcoming advisory opinion of the International Court of Justice proposed last year by Norway, and with Liechtenstein's support in this regard. Mr. President, the membership will discuss the two-state solution at greater length at next week's summit meeting. But let us remind all actors, including those looking to effect demographic change, the two-state solution is not up for debate, only its implementation is. In partial fulfillment of its own Resolution 181, this Assembly has indeed recognized the existence of two states, Israel and the State of Palestine. Attempts to change this reality by force are in opposition to the purposes and principles of this organization and the expressed will of its membership. Liechtenstein looks forward to working with all states to protect civilians and to uphold international law. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Liechtenstein. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, President. The United Kingdom voted in favour of this resolution in line with our unwavering determination to end the suffering in Gaza, bring the hostages home, and move towards lasting peace in the region. Let me start by repeating our unequivocal condemnation of Hamas and their despicable actions on and since the 7th of October. They must be held accountable and can play no role in the future governance of Gaza. The UK's commitment to Israel's security is resolute. President, the text of this resolution is clear that both Israel and Hamas need to agree to an immediate and unconditional ceasefire, that Hamas must immediately and unconditionally release the hostages, and that Israel, as the occupying power, must end its blocks on aid and ensure unhindered humanitarian access. And crucially, there must be an end to any actions that stand in the way of a two-state solution and the best chance for peace for the Israeli and Palestinian people. That is why this week the UK, along with Australia, Canada, New Zealand and Norway, sanctioned Bezalel Smotrich and Itamar Ben-Gvir. These two men are responsible for inciting settler violence against Palestinians in the West Bank with their extremist rhetoric. Attacks by violent settlers have led to the deaths of Palestinian civilians and the displacement of whole communities. We will not stand by while Israeli actions attempt to entrench a one-state reality. The UK is deeply concerned by ongoing Israeli operations in the West Bank, including incidents where children have been killed. This is appalling and unacceptable. President, there can be no military solution to this conflict. Over 55,000 Palestinians have been killed, and the IPC have been clear that 500,000 people are facing starvation. Israeli government policies which have completely blocked or severely restricted humanitarian aid are unacceptable. That civilians have been killed while desperately trying to feed their families is inhumane, and the UK rejects any attempts at demographic or territorial change in the Gaza Strip. While the UK voted in favour of this resolution, we wish to clarify that our long-standing position remains that Common Article 1 of the Geneva Conventions does not impose a legal obligation on states to ensure respect for international law by third parties. President, a two-state solution remains the only viable framework for a just and lasting peace. This is the fundamental principle that we must continue to strive for, to end the cycle of violence and give Palestinians and Israelis alike a better future. We welcome the leadership of France and Saudi Arabia in convening next week's conference in pursuit of this. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of the United Kingdom. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Republic of Korea.
Mr. President, as a Security Council member,
the Republic of Korea has reiterated its deep concerns over the catastrophic humanitarian situation in Gaza. We have also stressed that it is an obligation of the occupying power to allow full and unimpeded humanitarian aid for innocent civilians in Gaza, in full cooperation with the UN and other humanitarian agencies. We have also strongly called for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza and expressed our steadfast support for the ongoing efforts by mediating countries, US, Qatar, and Egypt, to secure a deal for a ceasefire and release of all hostages. Mr. President, today we voted in favor of the resolution tabled by Spain based on our principled and rule-based positions. We viewed the important elements included in the text of the resolution, including the demands for a ceasefire and release of all hostages held by Hamas, for compliance with the obligations under international law and for the full and unhindered entry of humanitarian aid, as well as an unwavering commitment to the two-state solution. While we voted for the resolution adopted today, we understand its final text was a result of a compromise among member states to garner support as widely as possible. Thus, we would like to reaffirm our consistent position condemning the horrific terrorist attack by Hamas on October 7. Heading toward the high-level conference on the two-state solution to be held next week, we hope that the efforts by the international community, including the General Assembly, will contribute to restoring peace and stability in the region, as well as to enhancing the political horizon for a better future for both Palestinians and Israelis based on the two-state solution. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Republic of Korea. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Czechia.
Well, thank you, Mr. President. And allow me first to express our deep concern regarding the grave humanitarian situation unfolding in Gaza. Czechia supports efforts to find a meaningful and durable resolution to the fighting on the ground, including the swift release of all hostages. The tragic developments we are witnessing clearly demonstrate that this protracted conflict cannot and will not be resolved by force alone. At the same time, I wish to reiterate my country's firm commitment to Israel's right to defend itself in full compliance with international law and international humanitarian law. Nevertheless, we cannot remain silent in the face of the dire reality on the ground, and we urge all sides, including the Israeli authorities, to take every measure possible to facilitate the unimpeded delivery of humanitarian assistance to the civilian population in Gaza. Mr. President, we indeed support many aspects of this resolution, particularly those explicitly aimed at addressing humanitarian needs in Gaza. Yet, the resolution regrettably goes well beyond its stated humanitarian objective by incorporating some highly politically charged and even one-sided assertions. First and foremost, while we acknowledge that for the first time this General Assembly resolution explicitly refers to Hamas, specifically in relation to the hostages currently held captive, we deeply regret that the text once again fails to unequivocally condemn Hamas's unspeakable atrocities of the 7th of October, carried out with the deliberate intent to murder innocent civilians, including women and children. Let us be absolutely clear. Hamas bears responsibility for countless atrocities, including perpetuating violence against Gaza's civilian population, cynically using civilians as human shields and diverting humanitarian aid for its own ends. Mr. President, the irrefutable truth remains that Hamas terrorists could immediately bring this brutal conflict to an end by laying down their arms and releasing all remaining hostages. Mr. President, in light of these considerations, we decided to abstain from voting on this resolution. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Zechia. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of New Zealand.
Thank you, President. New Zealand supported this resolution after careful consideration. We did so because a ceasefire in Gaza is desperately needed. Hamas's actions on and since 7 October 2023 are completely unconscionable and must be condemned unequivocally. Hamas's continued refusal to release the hostages they are holding is immoral and a barrier to progress on this situation. New Zealand has rightly designated Hamas in its entirety as a terrorist entity. At the same time, the humanitarian situation in Gaza is intolerable, and the world's patience has run out. As New Zealand has said consistently, this crisis must end. The excuses Israel has used for the ongoing suffering of innocent civilians are no longer credible. It is imperative that all parties comply with their obligations under international law. Israel is clearly required by international humanitarian law to provide for the basic needs of civilians in Gaza and to facilitate unimpeded humanitarian access. The protection of civilians, humanitarian personnel, and medical workers is essential. Like many members of the international community, New Zealand has already taken a range of measures in respect of this conflict. This resolution does not impose any new obligations on New Zealand. We reiterate our call for the parties to urgently return to a ceasefire. New Zealand will continue to advocate for meaningful progress towards a two-state solution, which remains the only blueprint for peace we have. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of New Zealand. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Bulgaria.
Mr. President, Bulgaria supported the resolution on protection of civilians and upholding legal and humanitarian obligations, reflecting our deep concern with the ongoing violence in Gaza and the worsening humanitarian crisis on the ground. The suffering of civilians, especially children and vulnerable persons, is unacceptable and must end. We fully support the language in the resolution on the protection of the humanitarian workers and the UN personnel. Bulgaria strongly condemns the attacks on the humanitarian personnel and recalls that civilian protection is a core legal obligation, not an option. We therefore call for all parties to respect and strictly implement the international law, including international humanitarian law. Bulgaria reiterates its unconditional condemnation of the heinous October 7th terrorist attacks perpetrated by Hamas. There can be no justification for such brutality. We insist on the immediate, dignified, and unconditional release of all hostages held by Hamas and other terrorist groups. We therefore welcome the language in the resolution reaffirming the legal prohibition of hostage-taking under international law and the obligation to release hostages. We regret, however, that the resolution fails to unequivocally condemn Hamas' brutal terrorist attack on 7th October, which the international community must denounce without any ambiguity. The international targeting of civilians, use of terror, and hostage-taking are blatant violations of international law, and the perpetrators must be held accountable. Bulgaria adds its voice to the call for upholding international law, recalls the need to fully implement the decisions and orders of the international courts, and will continue to oppose any attempts to politicization of the international judicial institutions. In closing, allow me to once again reaffirm Bulgaria's long-standing principled support for the two-state solution. The vision of Israel and Palestine coexisting side by side can only be achieved if Hamas is excluded from playing any role in the future of Gaza. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Bulgaria. I will now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Germany.
Thank you, Mr. President. Germany voted in favor of the resolution. We took this decision after careful considerations and numerous consultations, including at ministerial level with partners. Some, such as Italy, will also take the floor later for an explanation of vote. We once again unequivocally condemn the horrific attacks carried out by Hamas and other terrorist groups on October 7, 2023. Horrific attacks against innocent civilians. These attacks are unjustifiable. We call on the General Assembly to do the same, and we would have preferred to see corresponding language in this resolution. Mr. President, Israel has every right to defend itself against attacks within the limits of international law. It is our firm conviction, in order to improve the situation in Gaza, three things are urgently needed: an immediate return to a ceasefire, the immediate release of the hostages, and the unimpeded flow of humanitarian aid to Gaza. We are extremely worried about the fate of the hostages who continue to be held by Hamas and other terrorist groups in inhumane conditions. Hamas must release all hostages, and Hamas must lay down its arms immediately and unconditionally. There can be no future for Gaza with Hamas, neither in government nor militarily, and Hamas must be held accountable for its crimes. The use of civilian infrastructure for military purposes and any misuse of humanitarian assistance is utterly unacceptable. But Hamas cannot be defeated by military means alone. What is needed above all is a long-term political plan for the future of Gaza after the war. We are convinced that the two-state solution is the only realistic path that can allow both Israelis and Palestinians to coexist in peace, sovereignty, security, and dignity, and it is also the only path towards lasting peace and stability in the region. Germany fully supports the realization of the right of the Palestinian people to self-determination and their legitimate aspirations to establish their own state. Our approach is to help build the Palestine state every single day by developing and strengthening its foundation and future institutions through financial and technical cooperation. At the same time, Mr. President, Germany bears a special responsibility for Israel and for Israel's security. We firmly believe that the vision of an independent, democratic, and viable Palestinian state can only be achieved through negotiations. Germany is working actively and constructively with the international community toward this goal. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Germany. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of China.
主席，我感谢你举行今天的紧急特别联大。中方对决议草案投了赞成票。加沙冲突爆发已经19个月，5.5万多加沙民众被夺去生命，200多万民众深陷前所未有的人道灾难。这场冲突已经成为人类文明的污点， 上周，安理会10个非常任理事国提出了加沙人道问题决议草案，得到了14个安理会成员的支持，但再次遭到美国的否决。中方对此深感失望和遗憾。刚刚通过的这份联大决议草案反映了国际社会的压倒性呼声，发出了强有力的政治信号，体现了绝大多数会员国的团结与共识。我们绝不能继续允许无辜平民死亡。以色列持续升级对加沙的军事进攻，每天都有大量无辜生命消逝。无论用什么样的借口杀害平民，都不会变得高尚和正义。残酷事实已经说明，武力打不出和平，延长战争只会导致更多的死亡和仇恨。立即实现持久停火，才是拯救生命、让人质回家的正确方式。我们敦促以色列立即停止在加沙的一切军事行动，对当事方有重要影响力的国家，应该秉持公正、负责任态度，采取切实有力的行动。我们绝不能继续允许加沙的人道灾难恶化。联合国等人道机构多次发出警告，加沙即将发生大规模饥荒，而在加沙边境之外，大量食品堆积在仓库，却无法运送给饥饿的平民。这种强制剥夺民众获取生存物资权利的行为，违反国际人道法，残忍且不可接受。联合国已经指出，美国、以色列推动的人道物资分配机制违反公正、独立和中立原则，不足以缓解人道局势，反而给平民带来更大的危险。中方坚决反对把人道救援武器化，敦促以色列履行占领方义务，立即解除加沙封锁，全面恢复人道物资准入，支持联合国等人道机构开展工作。我们绝不能继续允许多边主义基石被侵蚀。冲突爆发以来，联大和安理会通过了多份决议，要求停火。国际法院发布了多项临时措施命令，但均没有得到有效落实。全面落实安理会决议是联合国宪章规定的所有会员国的义务。遵守国际法和国际人道法是各国义不容辞的责任。国际社会应采取必要行动，制止所有违法行为，并予以追责，共同捍卫多边主义和国际法权威。主席，落实两国方案是解决巴勒斯坦问题的唯一可行出路。下周将举行落实两国方案高级别会议，我们期待会议通过务实有效的成果，为实现两国方案前景注入新的动力。中方将同国际社会共同努力，持续推动平息加沙战火，缓解人道灾难，最终实现巴勒斯坦问题全面、公正、持久解决。谢谢主席。
I thank the distinguished representative of China. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Australia.
Thank you, President. Australia voted in favour of this resolution because we want to see an immediate return to a ceasefire in Gaza, the unconditional and immediate release of hostages, adherence to international humanitarian law by all parties, and rapid, sustained and unimpeded humanitarian access. While we do not agree with everything in this resolution, our vote today reflects our commitment to working with the international community to end this conflict. Australia remains unequivocal in our condemnation of Hamas and its abhorrent attacks on 7 October 2023 and all ongoing acts of terror. Terrorist group Hamas must release all hostages immediately, unconditionally, and with dignity, and we demand the hostages are given humane treatment, including freedom from any form of torture or abuse and access to health care. Australia is disappointed that today's resolution failed to condemn Hamas. There can be no role for Hamas in the future governance of Gaza. President, civilians are being killed by the thousand. Children are starving. We need to come together to ensure that we support a two-state solution which remains the only pathway to enduring peace and security for Israeli and Palestinian people. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Australia. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Sierra Leone.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, Sierra Leone voted in favor of the resolution. In doing so, we join the overwhelming majority in this Assembly in expressing deep alarm at the continuing and worsening humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza. Over 2 million civilians have endured weeks of siege, bombardment, and blockade, with grave and devastating consequences. The territory now confronts the prospect of famine after more than 11 weeks of total siege and severe restrictions on the flow of food, water, fuel, and medical supplies. Humanitarian reports indicate that Israeli security forces, strikes, and ground operations have killed tens of thousands of Palestinians, overwhelmingly civilians, including women and children. Under international law, no circumstance permits the deliberate starvation or collective punishment of a civilian population. The Fourth Geneva Convention and the established norms of customary international law strictly prohibit the use of starvation as a method of warfare. The systemic deprivation of basic life-saving resources is unequivocally unlawful. In this context, Sierra Leone recalls the binding provisional measures issued by the International Court of Justice in the case of South Africa versus Israel. The court ordered Israel to allow the unimpeded provision of urgent humanitarian assistance and to refrain from any action, I quote, calculated to bring about the Palestinian group's physical destruction in whole or in part, end of quote. Under the 1948 Genocide Convention, all states are obliged not only to refrain from acts of genocide, but to prevent and punish such crimes. The State of Israel is legally bound to comply with these measures. Any denial of life-saving aid or attacks on civilians constitute a grave breach of the Geneva Conventions and may amount to a war crime. Mr. President, in the Security Council, Sierra Leone has consistently underscored the gravity of this crisis. At our most recent briefing on the situation in the Middle East, we reflected on our national experience and reaffirmed our deep understanding of the consequences of delayed or insufficient international action. We recall with solemn clarity the collective failure to prevent the atrocities committed in Rwanda and Srebrenica, now formally recognized as genocide by competent international courts. These painful precedents underscore the cost of inaction. The ICJ's rulings reaffirm the binding legal and moral obligation of all states to act decisively to prevent genocide. The duty to prevent genocide is not discretionary. It is a preemptory norm of international law, jus cogens, binding upon all states. This duty requires not only abstention from such crimes, but the taking of timely, active, and effective measures to avert them. Today we face a moment of equal grave consequence. We are alarmed by credible and persistent reports of indiscriminate bombardment, the destruction of essential civilian infrastructure, the obstruction of humanitarian access, and inflammatory rhetoric. Together, these acts and omissions may contribute to creating conditions of life intended to bring about the destruction of a group in whole or in part, conduct expressly prohibited by the Genocide Convention. Mr. President, when Sierra Leone joined our elected council members in co-penning a draft resolution focused on addressing Gaza's worsening humanitarian crisis, we did so in full alignment with the ICJ's determination that Gaza's population must not be deprived of humanitarian assistance. Regrettably, despite its purely humanitarian focus, the draft resolution, aptly described by the E10 coordinator as the bare minimum, was vetoed by one permanent member, even as all 14 others voted in favor. Surely, silence or inaction in the face of mass atrocities must never be normalized. When the Security Council is paralyzed by the use of the veto, it falls to this General Assembly to act, and has rightly done so today. Sierra Leone fully supports the resolution's call for the protection of civilians and the unimpeded provision of humanitarian assistance. We also express grave concern at the recent interdiction of the United Kingdom flag humanitarian vessel Medlin by Israeli naval forces, reportedly in international waters. The ship carrying aid and civilian volunteers, as reported, was seized hundreds of kilometers from Gaza. Such actions violate the law of the sea and customary international law, which grant flag states exclusive jurisdiction on the high seas. Even where blockades are recognized under international law, they must not be used to starve civilian populations or obstruct humanitarian relief. Mr. President, accountability is essential. The deliberate use of starvation, attacks on medical personnel or UN workers, and the destruction of civilian infrastructures are not only violations of Geneva Conventions, but they also impose conditions of life calculated to bring about destruction, prohibited under international law. This Assembly must therefore invoke all lawful means, all lawful measures to uphold accountability and ensure respect for international law. Let us be clear. The rules which we invoke are acceptable as the rules developed and codified by the international community to promote peace and security, cooperation for development, and the protection of human dignity. Sadly, we do not invoke the rules today with the expectation of compliance. The experience of our tenure on the Security Council makes clear that compliance is unlikely in the absence of credible pressure from those with the means and leverage to ensure it. We therefore view with grave concern the growing practice of dismissing legal obligations as optional, of subordinating humanitarian imperatives for short-term political objectives, and of undermining the very institutions and instruments designed to uphold peace. Mr. President, throughout, Sierra Leone has reaffirmed the centrality of a political solution. We reiterate our steadfast support for a genuine two-state solution, the only just and sustainable outcome. Ending the occupation and blockade and implementing a just peace in accordance with international law and UN resolution is essential. The state of Israel and the Palestinian state must live side by side in security and dignity. This is the only path to lasting peace in the Middle East. In closing, Sierra Leone calls on all UN member states and parties to the conflict to honor their international obligations. We urge the State of Israel to comply fully with the ICJ's provisional measures, the Geneva Conventions and the Genocide Convention, including by allowing full aid and the protection of civilians. We demand that Hamas and all armed groups to refrain from targeting civilians or using them as human shields, and to release the hostages. This Assembly must send a clear message that the protection of civilians and adherence to international law are paramount. The Assembly has done so by adopting the resolution. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished representative of Sierra Leone. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Kingdom of the Netherlands.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I thank you for convening today's ESS, and I have the honor to deliver this explanation of vote on behalf of the Kingdom of the Netherlands. The Kingdom of the Netherlands voted in favor of the resolution. Our position is clear. The current cycle of violence is not the way forward for the sake of the hostages, the Palestinians, and for Israel. We therefore regret the veto cast in the Security Council. Mr. President, we condemn the humanitarian blockade of Gaza, which is contrary to international humanitarian law, and we call on Israel to immediately resume rapid, safe, and unhindered access to Gaza for humanitarian aid and basic services, including electricity. Humanitarian aid should never be militarized or used as political leverage and should be compatible with the humanitarian principles of neutrality, impartiality, and independence. We underline the critical importance of full, safe, access for professional mandated humanitarian organizations, including the United Nations, the Red Cross and Red Crescent Movement, and their partners, to reach all people in need across Gaza. We urgently recall Resolution 2417, adopted with landmark expression of unity. This resolution strongly condemns the use of starvation of civilians as a method of warfare, which is prohibited by international humanitarian law, and that it may constitute a war crime. This current resolution can be an important step towards a necessary permanent ceasefire. We urge all parties to commit to the continuation of the negotiations so that all hostages can be released immediately and unconditionally, and humanitarian aid can be delivered to those in need. Only then a lasting solution that has the support of both parties and for which the two-state solution remains the basis can be achieved. An independent, viable Palestinian state existing alongside a secure Israel is the only way this conflict can be resolved. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Kingdom of the Netherlands. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Italy.
Thank you, Mr. President, Excellencies, distinguished colleagues. Italy voted in favor of the resolution before the General Assembly today on the humanitarian situation in Gaza. We took this decision after careful consideration and consultation at ministerial level, including with some who already took the floor, such as Germany. It has been 20 months since the heinous attacks by Hamas against innocent civilians in Israel. Hamas is responsible for what is currently happening in Gaza. The Strip is now only rubble, desolation, and despair. Hostages are still being held by Hamas and other terrorist groups while their families are wasting away, losing hope by the day to hug them again. Hamas does not care for the welfare of the people of Gaza. For years, it has abused the rights of the citizens of Gaza, persecuted opponents, and used their resources not to improve their lives, but to prepare to unleash this tragedy on them. In the current crisis, Hamas is turning its people mercilessly into human shields and starving them. Let there be no mistakes about it. In this situation, the only solution to exit this deadlock is a diplomatic one. The only way to release the hostages passes through diplomacy. Here, too, Hamas seeks to preserve its own rule, not to improve on the predicament of the people of Gaza. We recognize the inherent right of Israel to self-defense, and we strongly reiterate the imperative to take all the hostages back home. Such objectives could, however, be realistically achieved only with an immediate ceasefire that would also alleviate the immense suffering of the Gazan civilians. It is essential that the territories of the Strip are made accessible to the action of international organizations, making it possible to resume full and unimpeded humanitarian assistance to the people of Gaza based on the respect of the rules of international humanitarian law. With today's resolution, the international community addresses those points, focusing on the indispensable humanitarian efforts to end the civilian misery, release the hostages, prevent further loss of life in Gaza. Of course, no resolution is perfect. We would have preferred to see in the text a clear condemnation of Hamas for all the above-mentioned reasons, or a paragraph spelling that hostage-taking and the use of civilians as a human shield are unequivocally against international humanitarian law. Notwithstanding those lacunae, we decided nonetheless to vote yes because of the overarching objective to get an immediate ceasefire, sparing innocent civilians, innocent women and children life, and making sure that humanitarian assistance is supplied immediately at scale and safely. Attaining this objective should also involve finding a solution to the Palestinian question. Italy firmly believes in a two-state solution whereby two states, Israel and Palestine, live in peace, dignity and security within international recognized borders, and two people, Israeli and Palestinians, have an equal right to exist and thrive. Italy will continue to work relentlessly toward this objective, also by co-chairing with Indonesia the Working Group on Security for Israelis and Palestinians in the framework of the Conference on the Two-State Solutions from June 17 to June 20. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished representative of Italy. Now I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Thailand.
Mr. President, Thailand voted in favor of this resolution because of our firm conviction that to address the urgent humanitarian crisis in Gaza is not only a moral imperative, but also a fundamental responsibility of the international community. Thailand remains deeply concerned about the dire humanitarian situation in Gaza and echoes the urgent appeal for the immediate, safe, and unhindered delivery of humanitarian assistance to all civilians in need. The UN personnel and humanitarian aid workers must be protected by all parties. The role of the UNRWA is critical to providing essential services and much-needed assistance, as well as to protect the rights and dignity of the Palestinian people. We call upon the international community to render support for its vital work. As we strengthen our collective humanitarian efforts, Thailand reiterates the urgent need for the international community to adopt a constructive approach towards achieving a lasting and sustainable peace in the region. Thailand urges all parties involved in the conflict to engage in diplomatic efforts to secure an immediate and durable ceasefire, the unconditional release of all remaining hostages, and the resumption of meaningful dialogue. We support the continued efforts of all parties concerned towards achieving a peaceful solution to the conflict, with the realization of the two-state solution by which the states of Israel and Palestine live side by side in peace and security in accordance with international law and the relevant United Nations resolutions. Lasting peace and stability in the Middle East must be supported by the creation of sustainable livelihoods and the promotion of the well-being of the Palestinian people. Thailand welcomes ongoing efforts toward the recovery and reconstruction of Gaza. We take this opportunity to reaffirm our determination to take part in these reconstruction and long-term development endeavors, which are crucial for ensuring a viable and prosperous future of the state of Palestine. In conclusion, Thailand once again reiterates its unwavering commitment to humanitarian efforts, as reflected in our vote today. We hope that this resolution will pave the way for an enduring peace and the end of the suffering of all peoples in the region. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Thailand. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Cyprus.
As a matter of principle, Cyprus reaffirms its commitment to the full protection of all civilians. Moreover, Cyprus supports that all parties to armed conflicts must comply with their obligations under international law, including the UN Charter, international humanitarian law, and international human rights law. This is why we voted in favor of the resolution. Notwithstanding this, we wish to make the following points. Cyprus unequivocally condemns the heinous terrorist attacks by Hamas on October 7th. And in this regard, We acknowledge the legitimate security concerns of Israel and its right to self-defense in line with international law. We also join the calls for the resumption of negotiations for a lasting and permanent ceasefire, which will entail the release of all hostages. All restrictions must be lifted to enable the immediate reestablishment of safe, sustained, and unimpeded flow of humanitarian assistance at scale for the civilians in Gaza. Mr. President, ultimately, the only sustainable way forward that meets the security concerns and needs of the legitimate stakeholders is reviving the Middle East peace process on the basis of a two-state solution in line with the UN resolutions. We will continue actively supporting this aim of achieving enduring conditions of peace and dignity, equally for Israelis and Palestinians alike, as well as for fostering long-term stability in the Middle East as a whole. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Cyprus. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Marshall Islands.
Mr. President, I wish to provide a short statement in explanation of our vote on Resolution L34. This resolution is now inadequate, and this continued undertaking now dysfunctional, where we vote on nearly the same words in repetition. Many in our remote Pacific Islands care deeply about what's happening and taking place in Gaza and Israel. Stories handed down by generations before us about World War II, the death, devastation, sufferings, and hunger visited upon our people and islands are part of our history. So while we may be a small speck of islands on the other side of the world and far from what's happening in Gaza and Israel, having experienced war, we know and we do care deeply about the humanitarian sufferings and the security issues raised in this resolution. Resolution 34 addresses the current humanitarian crisis in the occupied Palestine and in particular Gaza. It calls for the ceasefire to resume and for accountability regarding violations of international law for all parties, including international humanitarian law with regards to the denial of access to humanitarian aid and the use of starvation as a method of warfare. Last year, the UN Security Council passed a resolution nearly identical to this one before the General Assembly today. This resolution today, just like the UN Security Council resolution, reflects a humanitarian and legal consensus. And today we remain without a clear endpoint to a ceaseless civilian tragedy in Gaza, and the need persists to fully resolve kidnapped hostages and their remains. This resolution clearly states the due obligation under international law to deliver humanitarian aid unrestricted and without prescribing the distribution channel. That such a fundamental need for humanitarian survival becomes a patrolled mass killing as of grave concern. Yet also of concern is any potential for Hamas to take part in aid diversion. Months become years of a human rights crisis and violations remain without international accountability, and the same objective and factual evidence demanded elsewhere. Neither does the resolution bring itself to adequately reference the violent actions of Hamas on 7 October 2023, an entity which a majority of this body once defined as a militant and terrorist organization. The complexity of Gaza as both a security issue and as a humanitarian crisis has to be more clearly addressed. We too join the cause in emphasizing a two-state solution, as does the resolution. But we aren't going to return to the 2000 Camp David summit, nor return to the ceasefire as called for in this resolution without a significant step change in political will and perspective by all key and necessary actors. Simply put, as a General Assembly, we may not be able to easily wish or vote our way to a ceasefire. The Marshall Islands support any and all effective efforts to address recovery and reconstruction and urges continued dialogue towards the final and joint products, as well as how to jointly implement such approaches. And this crisis deserves leadership and pragmatic results before it continues to worsen and descend. The dramatic scale of suffering deserves a more effective response than institutional volley between the General Assembly and the Security Council. Mr. President, for the foregoing reasons, we voted abstain on Resolution 34. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Marshall Islands. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Ghana.
Mr. President, once again, the dire circumstances in the occupied Palestinian territory, especially the Gaza Strip, have imposed upon this Assembly the responsibility to resume the 10th emergency special session of the General Assembly and the solemn duty to act, and act we have. Since the horrendous attacks by the Hamas militants against southern Israel on 7th October 2023, the world has witnessed with the greatest of concern the brutal, disproportionate, and inhumane response that has been rolled out against the entirety of the Palestinian population in Gaza. Indeed, Ghana condemned Hamas for the brutal killing of the 1,200 innocent Israeli citizens and continues to do so for its holding hostage many innocent lives. However, the response to the continued military hostilities against the people of Gaza and the blockage of humanitarian aid to almost 2 million people, with grave consequences for their survival as a people, can only be a resounding no more. Mr. President, for my delegation, the outcome of the vote this afternoon is a reflection that no matter how grim circumstances may appear to be, the world is always filled with people ready to stand with what is right and to make their voices count. While Ghana takes careful note of the legitimate concerns of the State of Israel, the overriding interest of our common humanity, and the necessity to restrain all actions within the limits of international law and the Charter of the United Nations, compelled us to affirm strongly our unambiguous support for the resolution. We hold that this Assembly's decision today is a clear signal to Hamas that the international community does not tolerate its intransigent acts that run counter to the interest of the Palestinian people in Gaza. It must immediately and unconditionally release all hostages and take seriously all ongoing mediation efforts to activate the different phases of the broken ceasefire agreement that is now required more than ever. The future of the Palestinian people is at stake, and many of us here recognize it, but so also is the future of Israel and its people. Ghana therefore calls for both parties to seize the window of opportunity for peace that has narrowly been opened and to make determined efforts towards the immediate cessation of the conflict, the release of all hostages, the opening of access for humanitarian assistance, and the preservation of important pillars of promise that can restore a political horizon for a future dialogue, rebuilding, and the creation of the foundations that would enable the evolution of a peace-loving Palestinian state to exist side by side with the State of Israel. Thus far, war, death, and destruction have prevailed. But now, with the adoption of the resolution this afternoon, we must give peace its chance. I thank you very much.
I thank the distinguished representative of Ghana. We have heard the last speaker in explanation of vote for this meeting. We shall hear the remaining speakers at a later date to be announced. The meeting is adjourned.